Chapter 1932. Ji Tianxing's expression remained solemn as he stared at Nai Tianchen with a piercing gaze. Even though Nai Tianchen was able to answer his questions fluently, he did not give up. He continued to ask, "Who can testify for you?" Nai Tianchen looked up at Ji Tianxing and answered without hesitation, "The second elder, the fourth elder, and the guards who were on duty that night can testify for me." Ji Tianxing did not say anything. He turned to look at the Huanglong Daoist and signaled him with his eyes. The Huanglong Daoist immediately understood. He flashed to Nai Tianchen's side and reached out his hand to grab Nai Tianchen's shoulder. Nai Tianchen was shocked and instinctively stepped back. However, he was only a tribulation-passing martial monarch. How could he escape from the Huanglong Daoist's grasp? As soon as he took a step back, the Huanglong Daoist's big hand pressed down on his shoulder. He could not move at all. His body was frozen on the spot, and his face was filled with anxiety and fear. "Master, what are you doing? I didn't do anything wrong. Why are you doing this to me for no reason?" Nai Tianchen looked at the Huanglong Daoist and asked with grief and indignation. The Huanglong Daoist was still expressionless. A powerful surge of magic power gushed out of his palm and enveloped Nai Tianchen's body. Immediately, Nai Tianchen's magic power was sealed. His body was also enveloped by magic power. He could not struggle at all. Ji Tianxing said calmly, "Your master is worried about your health. He's just checking your injuries. Why are you so flustered?" Nai Tianchen could not move his body, but he could still move his neck. He quickly shook his head and said angrily, "I'm fine. I'm not injured at all. There's no need to check." Ji Tianxing said expressionlessly, "That's not necessarily true. There was an invasion last night. Maybe you were unintentionally injured and you didn't even notice it." Nai Tianchen instantly realized what Nai Tian was trying to say. Growing even more anxious and nervous, he hastily explained, "Even though I was injured, it was because I fought against powerful enemies to protect our sect. However, I only suffered some light injuries and have long since recovered. There is no need for Grandmaster and Master to worry. Last night in the training hall, he was swept by the sword chi of the burial of heaven and was indeed slightly injured, leaving a wound on his back. However, after the incident, he used a secret technique and medicinal pills to heal his injuries, and his injuries had long been healed. Even the wound on his back had recovered to normal and could no longer be seen." He thought that Ji Tianxing and Huanglong Daoist were not at Tianju Mountain, and no one saw him with their own eyes. He was hoping that he wouldn't be exposed, so he continued to stay in the pillar of heaven's mountains. Even when Huanglong Daoist came looking for him and told him that Ji Tianxing wanted to see him, he was not afraid. After all, he was very secretive and did not leave any traces behind. He was not afraid that Ji Tianxing and Huanglong Daoist would investigate him. However, when he heard Ji Tianxing's words, he began to panic. As Ji Tianxing said, perhaps the sword of the burial of heaven had left some marks on his body that he did not even notice. At the thought of this, Nai Tianchen's heart was burning with anxiety, and fine beads of sweat appeared on his forehead. Fortunately, Huanglong Daoist soon finished examining him and released him. However, Nai Tianchen did not dare to relax. He was secretly vigilant and quietly retreated. His right hand was hidden in his sleeve, secretly holding a white pearl the size of a date pit. He was ready to escape at any time. The white pearl was a life-saving item given to him by Lord Yi. Once it was activated, he could teleport hundreds of miles away. If Ji Tianxing and Huanglong Daoist wanted to harm him, he would activate the pearl without hesitation and escape from Tianju Mountain. Of course, the pearl could only be used once. After that, it would dissolve and dissipate. He had to be very careful. Huanglong Daoist took a step back expressionlessly. He turned to look at Ji Tianxing and shook his head slightly. He seemed to be saying that he did not find anything unusual. Ji Tianxing frowned. A hint of confusion flashed in his eyes, but he did not say anything. Nai Tianchen stared at Ji Tianxing, waiting for his reaction. His nerves were stretched to the limit. The veins on his hand that was holding the white pearl were bulging, and his palms were sweating. It was only 2 breaths, but it felt as long as 2 months. Finally, Ji Tianxing raised his eyebrows and said calmly, Since Grand Elder is so loyal to our sect, you may leave. To Nai Tianchen, his words were like music to his ears. Nai Tianchen's nerves immediately relaxed. His heart, which had been in his throat, also fell back into his stomach. He secretly let out a sigh of relief. His whole body seemed to have been drained of all strength. He quietly put away the white pearl and took a deep breath. Trying to keep his voice calm, he said, "If there's nothing else, I'll take my leave." Ji Tianxing nodded expressionlessly and said, "Go." Nai Tianchen clasped his hands and bowed. Then, he turned around and walked toward the door. Ji Tianxing's sharp eyes noticed that drops of cold sweat were flowing down Nai Tianchen's neck and back. This tiny detail caused the corners of his mouth to curl up into a sneer, and a cold light flashed in his eyes. At the same time, Huanglong Daoist, who had been silent all this time, suddenly raised his hands and grabbed at Nai Tianchen's back. His palms burst out with dazzling golden light, forming a giant golden palm that enveloped Nai Tianchen's body. Nai Tianchen was secretly relieved. He thought to himself, "Damn Ji Tianxing. His intuition is so sharp that he actually suspected me and confronted me face to face. Fortunately, I was quick-witted and answered without any flaws. That's why I was able to escape this disaster. It seems that I'll have to be more careful from now on. I can't let any flaws slip." He was distracted and did not guard against Huanglong Daoist's sudden attack. By the time he sensed danger approaching, it was already too late for him to dodge. Bam! With a muffled thump, the giant golden hand grabbed Nai Tianchen and held him in a tight grip. Nai Tianchen's expression changed drastically. He unleashed all of his magic power and struggled with all his might. However, the giant golden palm sealed his magic power, making him unable to move at all. He could only watch as Huanglong Daoist grabbed him with a cold smile on his face. He wanted to take out the white pearl from his space ring and teleport out of the pillar of Heaven's mountains. However, this was only an extravagant hope. His divine soul was imprisoned, and there was nothing he could do. "Mars. Master, what are you doing?" Frightened, he glared at Huanglong and asked, "What's wrong?" Huanglong Daoist sneered and said in a playful tone, "Don't you know what I'm doing? Tell me. I've treated you well. Why are you colluding with foreign enemies?" Nai Tianchen widened his eyes in horror and quickly shook his head to deny it. "No. Master, you must be mistaken. I've been loyal to you and the pillar of Heaven's mountains. I've never colluded with foreign enemies." Chapter 1933. Black-robed martial sage. Nai Tianchen widened his eyes and stared at Huanglong in bewilderment, as if he had no idea what was going on. Black-robed martial sage. When I arrived at the Taoist sanctum last night, the fight had already ended. I only heard from others that there were black-robed men fighting in the Taoist sanctum. I don't know anything about the black-robed martial sage. Nai Tianchen defended himself with a serious expression, as if he really meant what he said. His expression, tone, and eyes did not seem to be lying. However, the Huanglong Daoist already knew the answer. He stared at Nai Tianchen coldly, his eyes full of mockery. "Ha ha ha. Nai Tianchen, you have been in the pillar of Heaven's mountain for hundreds of years. I have been guiding you and watching you grow up. I thought you were a trustworthy person. However, today, I realized I was wrong. I don't know the real you at all. I am amazed by your acting skills. Keep pretending. Keep pretending." Nai Tianchen looked at Daoist Huanglong with an aggrieved expression, as if he had suffered a great deal. "Master, where did you get all this from? I have done nothing wrong. Why are you framing me?" Ji Tianxing could not stand it anymore. He did not want to see Nai Tianchen's hypocritical face anymore. He asked directly, "Nai Tianchen, you said that the fight had already ended when you arrived at the Taoist sanctum. You didn't see any black-robed men. You only heard about it from others. Let me ask you, why was the sword chi of the holy sword still in your body when you were injured last night?" Nai Tianchen was stunned. A hint of panic flashed in his eyes. However, he remained calm. He pretended to be confused and asked, "What? The sword chi of the holy sword? That's impossible. I was never injured." Ha ha ha. The sneer on Ji Tianxing's face deepened as he questioned, Didn't you just say that you were slightly injured in order to protect our sect and that you've already recovered? How are you going to cover up your lie when you contradict yourself? Nai Tianchen was at a loss for words. His eyes darted around as he tried to think of a way to explain himself. Ji Tianxing continued, last night, the black-robed martial sage fought with the sacred sword and was repelled by the sacred sword before fleeing. There was also a black-clothed man who held the sect's medallion and brought the black-robed martial sage into the sect. Then, he followed the black-robed martial sage out of the pillar of heaven's mountains. This person was a spy who colluded with foreign enemies. When the sacred sword had attacked the black-robed martial sage, the sword light had struck the spy, leaving behind sword qi in his body. Nai Tianchen, do you have anything else to say? With these words, Ji Tianxing's eyes were as sharp as swords, and his body burst forth with heaven-suppressing divine might that swept toward Nai Tianchen. Nai Tianxing's expression changed instantly. He hurriedly shook his head and explained, no, that's impossible. I'm not a spy, and I don't have any sword qi in my body. If there really was the sword qi of the saint sword, how could I not know? Ji Tianxing didn't say anything. Instead, he winked at the Huanglong Daoist. Huanglong Daoist raised his left hand and shot out a ray of blazing white light, which penetrated into Nai Tianxing's body. After the blazing white light entered the depths of Nai Tianxing's body, it dug out a strand of black sword qi that was as thin as a hair and slowly flew out. Huanglong Daoist held the strand of black sword qi in his left hand and stretched it toward Nai Tianchen. He said coldly, Nai Tianchen, what else do you want to say? Nai Tianchen's eyes widened as he stared at the strand of black sword qi. His whole body stiffened. His mind was blank. All the excuses he had prepared before were useless at this moment. He stared blankly at the strand of black sword qi and shook his head with a pale face. He murmured, this is impossible, absolutely impossible. At this time, Ji Tianxing continued, Nai Tianchen, you probably don't know how magical the sky spell that I set up personally is. Only disciples who are deacons and above can freely enter and exit the sky spell with their identity badges. The sky spell has a record of which badges have entered and exited the sky spell every day. Before you came to the main hall, I had already checked the record of last night's entry and exit. Unfortunately, you entered and exited the sky spell a total of 4 times last night. Hearing this, Nai Tianchen widened his eyes in horror. His face was full of disbelief and he was almost stunned. He couldn't believe that the sky spell had such an effect. Wasn't this too inconceivable? Ji Tianxing sneered and said slowly, after checking your entry and exit records, I have already guessed what happened. Yesterday, after Huanglong and I left Tianzhu Mountain, you realized that your chance had come. So you contacted the black-robed martial sage and prepared to take action at night. Last night, you disguised yourself as a black-robed man and quietly left Tianzhu Mountain to meet the black-robed martial sage. Half an hour later, you took the black-robed martial sage through the sky spell and returned to Tianzhu Mountain to explore the sword stele in the middle of the dojo. The holy sword suddenly attacked the black-robed martial sage and caused a huge commotion. The black-robed martial sage was worried that the plan would be exposed, so he took you and left Tianzhu Mountain. 15 minutes later, the black-robed martial sage left and you secretly escaped to Tianzhu Mountain. Then, you resumed your identity as the Grand Elder and pretended that you had discovered something unusual and went to the dojo to meet everyone. After that, Ji Tianxing stared at Nai Tianchen and asked with a cold smile, what do you think? Am I right? Nai Tianchen was already dumbfounded. He stared at Shu Qiu in horror and pursed his lips without saying a word. Apparently, Ji Tianxing's deduction was completely correct and matched the fact. Nai Tianchen could no longer refute this. He was in complete despair. Knowing that his identity had been exposed, he stopped pretending. He. Ha 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 ha, Nai Tianchen sneered in a low voice. Then, he raised his head and laughed wildly. As expected of the descendant of Kenshin, you have such a brilliant method. I have always been cautious and I have not been discovered for hundreds of years. I didn't expect you to see through me in the end. Since you can come back alive, it means that the plan of the Grand Elder has failed. Nai Tianchen stared at Ji Tianxing ferociously and sneered, but don't be too proud of yourself. The Grand Elder has never failed to do anything he wants to do. You are lucky to come back alive. But next time, you will not be so lucky. You will definitely die. Tianzhu Mountain will be razed to the ground. Ji Tianxing was not angry. He looked at Nai Tianchen expressionlessly and asked, I am very confused. You have joined Tianzhu Mountain for hundreds of years and lived here for a few decades. Huang Long is your master and he taught you a unique skill and taught you how to cultivate. Even if you are a stubborn rock, you should have feelings. Why are you so heartless and willing to be the enemy's lackey to destroy Tianzhu Mountain, your own people and your master? Nai Tianchen knew that he was going to die, so he did not hide anything. He sneered and said, Hey, before I joined Tianzhu Mountain, I was a powerful man with a wife and a family. If I didn't follow orders, my life and my family would be in danger. However, I was ordered to join Tianzhu Mountain as a spy. That way, I could protect my wife and my family and help my descendants to achieve great things. Chapter 1934. Apparently, Nai Tianchen had no choice but to submit to the black-robed martial sage's threats and promises. Huang Long Daoist frowned and sneered, Nai Tianchen, this is not what you said when you entered the Pillar of Heaven's mountains and became my disciple. You said that your parents died and your family was wiped out by a powerful enemy. You escaped alone and had nowhere to go. Nai Tianchen glanced at him expressionlessly and said indifferently, Of course, I lied to you. Everyone knows that you are a kind person. If I didn't use some tricks, how could I trick you into trusting me? Huang Long's face was filled with anger as he cursed, You bastard. Nai Tianchen showed no remorse. He sneered and said, Now that things have come to this, it's useless to say anything more. You don't have to waste your breath. I will never betray that lord. If you want to kill me or torture me, just do it. He acted like a dead pig that was not afraid of boiling water, which made Huang Long Daoist tremble with anger. However, Ji Tianxing didn't seem angry at all. Instead, he said with a grim face, Nai Tianchen, do you think that you'll be able to keep your secret and protect your family by dying? Ha ha ha. You are too naive. You don't understand my methods at all. Sometimes, death is not scary. It is scary to live a life worse than death. As he spoke, he waved his hand and a silver divine star fire flew toward Nai Tianchen. Seeing the divine star fire flying toward him, Nai Tianchen was not afraid at all. Instead, he sneered. Ha ha, you are just extorting a confession by torture. I knew this day would come. Do you think I will be afraid of you? Just as he finished speaking, the ball of star divine fire hit him. Boom. The divine star fire immediately spread out and covered Nai Tianxin's body like a layer of silver sand. Then, the divine star fire exploded with a violent power and started to burn Nai Tianxin's body. His robes and hair were quickly burned to ashes and scattered on the ground. His skin was also burned black by the divine star fire. It dried up and curled up, with black smoke rising from it. In the blink of an eye, his skin was burned to ashes. The extreme pain caused his entire body to twitch as he gritted his teeth and growled. Ji Tianxing was not moved at all. He controlled the star divine fire to continue burning his flesh. Immediately afterwards, Nai Tianxin's flesh and blood also turned black. Like a piece of coal, his flesh and blood began to crack and shatter, leaving behind a cloud of black ash. His body was curled up like a shrimp, and his originally tall body had turned into a lump of black charcoal. One could barely make out the shape of a human. However, the burning speed of the star divine fire was very slow. Only after a full 100 breaths of time did Nai Tianxin's fleshly body turn into black ashes. During this process, indescribable pain and torment constantly invaded his soul. This kind of torture was even more painful than being hacked into pieces. It was definitely not something an ordinary person could endure. Nai Tianchen gritted his teeth and let out agonized screams. However, he refused to beg for mercy. Finally, Nai Tianxin's flesh and skin were burned to a crisp. All that was left of him was a pitch-black skeleton. However, he still had a breath of life, and didn't die on the spot. Then, Ji Tianxing controlled the star divine fire to burn his bones and meridians. The star divine fire rose fiercely and wrapped around his body tightly, giving rise to sizzling sounds and wisps of black smoke. Nai Tianchen fell to the ground and struggled in pain. He rolled over and over, letting out ear-piercing screams. However, since the bones were the hardest part of the fleshly body, Ji Tianxing deliberately controlled the star divine fire to slow down the burning speed. According to the current situation, it would take the star divine fire at least a quarter of an hour to burn his bones to ashes. In other words, Nai Tianchen would have to suffer for another quarter of an hour. Seeing him like this, Huanglong Daoist couldn't help but shout, "Nai Tianchen, you evil creature, are you still not willing to beg for mercy? You would rather be burned to ashes than reveal the identity of the black-robed martial sage." As Nai Tianchen ran back and forth in the hall, he called out in a low voice, Ji Tianxing, if you have the guts, kill me and give me a quick death. You have underestimated my willpower. No matter how you torture me, I will never beg for mercy. Ji Tianxing shook his head and said with a cold smile, "Do you want to die? I'm sorry, but in front of me, your life is not up to you. I won't kill you. On the contrary, I will let you live forever. Every day and night, you will be burned and tortured by the star divine fire, and you will struggle in endless pain. This is the punishment for a traitor." With these words, Ji Tianxing waved his right hand in the air, manipulating the cluster of divine flame in different ways to torture Nai Tianchen. Nai Tianchen's willpower was indeed strong. Half of his bones had been burned to ashes, but he still refused to speak. Ji Tianxing was not in a hurry. He continued to torture him with the star divine fire. Before they knew it, a quarter of an hour had passed. Nai Tianchen's bones had all been burned to ashes. Even his skull and teeth, which were the hardest part of his body, had been burned to ashes. His body had been completely destroyed. Only his divine soul was left, which was still wrapped in the star divine fire. At this moment, Nai Tianchen had been tortured to the point of mental breakdown. His divine soul had been severely injured, and his consciousness had become blurry. He could not hold on any longer. "Stop. Stop it. Ji Tianxing. I'll tell you everything. Stop." Nai Tianchen's divine soul was fluctuating, and he let out a miserable wail. Finally, he began to beg for mercy. Ji Tianxing shook his head and said indifferently, "Aren't you a man of integrity? Why don't you keep your mouth shut? I have just started to torture you, and you are already begging for mercy. How boring." Nai Tianchen was rendered speechless by Shu Qiu's sarcasm. He felt extremely humiliated and indignant. Of course, compared to the pain he was suffering, this humiliation was nothing. "Don't you want to know the identity of the black-robed martial saint? I can tell you, but you have to promise me one thing." Nai Tianchen's divine soul was flickering with white light. His strength was getting weaker and weaker, but he was still struggling. Before he could finish, Ji Tianxing interrupted him and said contemptuously, "Do you think you are qualified to negotiate with me? Do you think you are qualified? I already know the identity of the black-robed martial saint. You are useless now. Now, I will suppress you in the star divine furnace and let you be roasted by the divine fire for 1,000 years. I will let you die in endless pain." After saying that, Ji Tianxing waved his hand and a golden palm shadow appeared, which grabbed at Nai Tianchen's divine soul. Nai Tianchen was dumbfounded. He had never thought that Ji Tianxing would torture him so cruelly even though he already knew the answer. The humiliation of being toyed with, as well as the anger of being toyed with, instantly exploded in his soul, making him go mad with rage. "Ah, Ji Tianxing. You despicable bastard, you will die a horrible death." Nai Tianchen roared at the top of his lungs. Chapter 1935. The giant golden hand flew back to Ji Tianxing with Nai Tianchen's divine soul in its hand. Ji Tianxing held the divine soul in his right hand and began to search Nai Tianchen's soul and memory with the soul-searching secret method. Huanglong Daoist didn't expect that things would turn out like this. Seeing that Ji Tianxing was holding Nai Tianchen's divine soul in silence, he couldn't help but ask, "Master, Nai Tianchen has begged for mercy. Why don't you listen to his answer? Do you really know the identity of the black-robed martial sage?" Ji Tianxing closed his eyes and said expressionlessly, "I just guessed the answer. I can't be sure." Huanglong Daoist was even more confused. He asked, "Then why don't you let him tell you the answer?" Ji Tianxing said, Although Nai Tianchen begged for mercy, he still wants to try his luck. He wants to negotiate with me. Isn't that wishful thinking? I don't need him to tell me the answer. I can use the soul-searching secret method to directly search his soul and memory. Then I will know the truth. Huanglong Daoist frowned slightly and asked tentatively, soul-searching secret method? Since Master has mastered such a wonderful technique, why don't you use it earlier? Why waste time with him? Ji Tianxing explained calmly, my divine soul is only in the tribulation realm. I can't use the soul-searching secret method on Nai Tianchen directly. First, I use the star divine fire to torture him and break his will. Then, I will severely injure his divine soul. Only then can I successfully search his soul and memory. After hearing this, Huanglong Daoist suddenly understood. He quickly cupped his hands and said, I see. Master, you are really good. As the saying goes, when the devil is 1 foot tall, the Tao is 10 feet tall. Nai Tianchen is still too inexperienced to play tricks in front of Master. Then, he asked again, Master, what are you going to do with Nai Tianchen after you find out the truth? Ji Tianxing said coldly, imprison him in the star divine furnace until his divine soul is burned out by the star divine fire. Huanglong Daoist thought for a moment and said tentatively, Shizuan, this disciple has an immature suggestion. Why don't you use a secret technique to control his soul and send a message to the black-robed martial sage? After that, we will set up traps and ambushes. It is very likely that we will be able to capture that black-robed martial saint. At that time, even if we can't kill him, we can still severely injure him. Ji Tianxing thought for a moment, then shook his head lightly and said, if it were someone else, this would be a good plan. However, the black-robed martial saint was the commander of the immortal guards of the Tianju divine nation. He was martial god Tianju's trusted subordinate. This person had always been sinister and cunning, and was extremely difficult to deal with. We've already fought him, so I doubt he'll take the bait even if we use Nai Tianxin's name to send him a message. So, don't waste your energy. Huanglong Daoist's face was filled with shock, and his eyes were filled with disbelief. What? The black-robed martial saint who attacked us turned out to be the heaven-end divine nations. Commander of the divine guards. Yi Liu Shui? How could it be him? He is martial god Tianju's right-hand man, a martial saint expert who leads the divine guards. He has always been elusive. Huanglong Daoist was inexplicably shocked. He could not accept this answer, nor could he believe this result. What's more, the pillar of heaven's mountains has already withered to this point. How could he deliberately plot against us? Nai Tianchen has been in our sect for hundreds of years. Doesn't that mean that Yi Liu Shui has been targeting us for hundreds of years? Ji Tianxing finished casting the spell and slowly opened his eyes. He had already searched Nai Tianxin's soul memory and obtained the exact answer. Seeing that Huanglong Daoist was unwilling to believe it, he said calmly, when I first returned to the Pillar of Heaven's Mountains, you told me that there were many powerful forces that were targeting our sect other than the North Underworld Mountain. Among them, the most hidden and most powerful force had never been found out who it was. Now the truth is out. That force is the Heaven-End Divine Nation. He raised his head to look outside the hall and said leisurely, in the past, Martial God Tai Hao and Martial God Luo Shui were indebted to me and respected me greatly. They would definitely not target the Pillar of Heaven's Mountains. Only Martial God Tianju is arrogant and he is hostile to me. Today, the three martial gods might not be attached to worldly power and wealth anymore. Their biggest wish and goal is to leave this world and ascend to the upper world to pursue the divine Tao of immortality. Huanglong Daoist immediately understood what he meant and said, Martial God Tianju wants to know the mystery of Master's ascension. That's why he targeted the Pillar of Heaven's Mountains. He was a supreme martial god. Due to his status and face, he could not personally deal with the Pillar of Heaven's Mountains. Moreover, he was worried that Martial God Tai Hao and Martial God Luo Shui would join hands to stop him. Therefore, he gave this task to his trusted subordinate, Yi Liu Shui. That's why Yi Liu Shui sneaked into our sect to investigate the sword Steely in the dojo. After the matter was exposed, he fled the Pillar of Heaven's Mountains without hesitation. Ji Tianxing nodded and said, that's right. Your guess is not far from the truth. Yi Liu Shui came for the mystery of Master's ascension. As for whether he planned it himself or was instructed by martial god Tianzhu, that's unknown. Daoist Huang Long furrowed his brows tightly, his expression turning solemn. Since the black-robed martial saint is Yi Liu Shui, then we are in trouble. North Underworld Mountain wants to kill us, and Heaven End Divine Nation is also targeting us. Our sect's situation is worrying. There was something he did not say out loud. With the current strength of the Pillar of Heaven's mountains, they could not even resist the North Underworld Mountain. How could they be qualified to deal with the Heaven End Divine Nation? Ji Tianxing was not worried and said calmly, "Don't worry. Today, we fought with Yi Liu Shui and alerted the enemy. This guy is cautious and will not act rashly in the short term. Next, we only need to deal with the North Underworld Mountain with all our strength." Huang Long Daoist was relieved and said, "Disciple will follow Master's instructions." Ji Tianxing thought for a moment and said, "Master will go into seclusion for a few days. Next, you have a lot of things to do. First, appease the disciples and double the cultivation resources so that everyone can improve their strength as soon as possible. In addition, you have to reorganize the 9 sects and 18 schools and establish a cooperative defense system. Let the sects strengthen their vigilance. Once they find a demon in the territory, they have to join forces to encircle and suppress it. No matter which sect or city you are from, as long as you can kill a demon, I will reward you according to your contribution. If anyone can kill a demon monarch, I will reward them with 5 million spirit stones and a supreme grade tribulation level cultivation technique. If someone can make a greater contribution, I will not only reward him with cultivation resources, but also personally guide him in martial art." Hearing what he said, Huang Long Daoist suddenly exclaimed, "Master, isn't it too generous of you to reward people according to their contribution?" Ji Tianxing said with a serious face, "In this chaotic world, we must use extreme means to see the effect. With great rewards, there will be brave men." Huang Long Daoist hesitated and asked, "Master is a god and has the world's martial arts hidden in your heart. Rewarding cultivation methods is nothing. But our sect does not have many cultivation resources. How can we give out rewards?" Chapter 1936. Ji Tianxing reminded the Huang Long Daoist and went into seclusion in the secret chamber. Before going into secluded cultivation, he made a trip to the Star Divine Furnace underground. He suppressed Nai Tianxin's soul in the star torch and let it endure the burning and torture of the Star Divine fire. Then, he returned to the secret chamber to cultivate in seclusion. The Huang Long Daoist also left the main hall to appease the disciples and assign tasks to the elders. After he dealt with the sect affairs of the Pillar of Heaven's mountains, he had to gather the sect leaders of the 9 sects and 18 schools to formulate a joint attack and defense plan. In short, the Huang Long Daoist would be busy for the next few days. In the dimly lit secret chamber, Ji Tianxing sat on the throne and silently cultivated. There were a lot of cultivation resources in his interspatial ring, piled up into several mountains. In the next few years, he didn't have to worry about cultivation resources. Although he had set the rules of rewards based on merit, he knew very well that there were very few people who could make great contributions. He said these words just to paint a big picture for the 9 sects and 18 schools and the martial artists of the various cities. As for the specific results, he still had to observe. Unknowingly, 10 days passed in a flash. Ji Tianxing cultivated the 5th level of the Sword Soul Path and crazily improved his strength. Now, his soul and body had both reached the peak of the tribulation stage. The bucket was strong enough and big enough. He only needed to pour the water in with all his strength. After the water was full, he could naturally break through and reach a higher realm. In just 10 days, he had consumed hundreds of thousands of spirit stones, hundreds of pills, and gems. These cultivation resources were worth 3 million, and he had consumed them all in just 10 days. The price was very high. However, the result of such cultivation was outstanding. His strength had reached the peak of the 3rd level of the tribulation stage and was about to break through to the 4th level of the tribulation stage. In the depths of his soul, he had a strong feeling. The 4th heavenly tribulation was coming soon, therefore, He ended his cultivation and entered the star divine furnace underground. The surging silver sea of fire had reached a radius of 80 miles, occupying 80% of the furnace. The power of the star divine fire was even more violent, and the divine power was even purer. Ji Tianxing passed through the silver sea of fire and arrived near the torch in the middle of the furnace. The torch was empty. Nai Tianxin's soul had long since disappeared. He only persisted for a few days before he was burned to ashes by the star divine fire. How useless! He muttered in a low voice, turned around, and flew to the edge of the divine furnace. Qian Yu and the Black Dragon were both in seclusion and had no distractions. The Black Dragon acted cautiously. He was not greedy for more. He carefully absorbed the star divine fire and steadily increased his strength. It possessed the ancient divine dragon's bloodline and had mastered the dragon clan's secret technique, astral transformation art. Its strength had increased significantly. Qian Yu's cultivation method made Ji Tianxing frown. Relying on the protection of the mysterious necklace, this guy desperately absorbed the divine fire of the stars and tempered his Dharma body with no regard for his own safety. He burned himself until he was as black as charcoal, a horrible sight to behold. However, it endured the pain and converted the astral divine fire into its own magic power, rapidly increasing its strength. Ji Tianxing could sense that its strength was far beyond that of an ordinary cultivator in the second stage of the crossing calamity. It was about to reach the critical point. Apparently, it would not be long before Qian Yu underwent another tribulation. Ji Tianxing silently observed for a while. Seeing that Qian Yu was not in danger, he quietly left. He took another look at the glazed treasure bottle. Under the protection of the longevity vines, the remnant soul of the white dragon was absorbing the star divine fire and recovering steadily. God knew how long it would take for the remnant soul of the white dragon to fully recover. Ji Tianxing stopped and observed for a while. Then he left the divine furnace and returned to the secret chamber. He stopped cultivating and sat quietly to adjust his condition. He adjusted his condition to the peak and waited for the arrival of the heavenly tribulation. As time passed, the heavenly tribulation in his soul became more and more intense. At midnight, he had an epiphany. He knew when the heavenly tribulation would come. It would come at noon tomorrow. After confirming the time of the heavenly tribulation, Ji Tianxing began to prepare. 6 hours later, dawn arrived. At this moment, a weak streamer flew in from the sky. It entered the secret chamber and fell into Ji Tianxing's hand. Ji Tianxing immediately opened his eyes and looked down at the streamer in his hand. Inside the streamer was a half-foot-long jade slip. It was purple-black in color. It was made of the space spirit jade of the demon clan. Ji Tianxing frowned slightly. He thought for a while and understood. It must be a message from Ku. He released a wisp of divine sense and entered the jade slip. Suddenly, a picture appeared in his mind. In the dark picture, there was a dim cave. There was a stone lamp in the corner, which was shining with purple light. Ji Ku was sitting in the corner of the cave. He was wearing black armor and a loose black robe. Under the fluffy black robe, a light purple face was revealed, as well as a pair of dull eyes that were covered in bloody light. Ji Ku looked no different from the demon clan except for his slender body. She seemed to be seriously injured. There was blood at the corner of her mouth. She looked very weak. There was a chopstick-long wound on her neck. Blood kept flowing out. However, she tried her best to support herself. She said in a weak voice, "Brother Tianxing, the demon god created a batch of blood gods a few days ago. There are hundreds of them. The great demon sage sent 10 demon monarchs and thousands of demon clan warriors to follow the blood gods and leave the North Underworld mountain. For half a year, the demon god has been studying how to improve the blood gods and eliminate their weaknesses. The demonic god had succeeded. The hundreds of blood gods' illusions were almost perfect killing machines, peerless weapons. Once they reach the North Underworld, the consequences will be unimaginable. The blood gods devour the blood and souls to feed the demon god. It will allow the demon god to recover to the god realm in the shortest time possible. Brother Tianxing, you must stop them. You must be careful. Nothing must happen to you." Ji Ku was already weak to begin with, and after speaking so many words intermittently, She was out of breath and gasping for breath. She seemed to be in a very dangerous situation. After saying this, she waved her hand and ended the transmission. The dark scene disappeared. Ji Tianxing gripped the transmission jade slip tightly. His face was full of worry. He whispered to himself, Ku is seriously injured and in a very dangerous situation. Has her identity been exposed? Impossible. She has the protection of the heavenly star chain. Her appearance and aura are demonized. There is no way she can be exposed. He was anxious and worried. He couldn't help but want to send a transmission jade slip to ask about Ji Ku's situation. However, he hesitated and dismissed the idea. He had to consider that if Ku was in danger and her identity might be exposed, then he couldn't send a transmission jade slip. At least, he couldn't send it now. That might harm Ku. Two different thoughts intertwined in his mind. He hesitated for a long time. After a long time, he suppressed the worry in his heart and calmed down to meditate and adjust his breathing. Chapter 1937. The next day, at noon. The pillar of heaven's mountain was as bright as ever, surrounded by colorful clouds. Ji Tianxing walked out of the secret chamber and arrived at the vast dojo. As soon as he walked to the sword stele, the originally clear sky was filled with wind and clouds. Large gray clouds flew from all directions and gathered above the pillar of heaven's mountain. Soon, the bright sun in the sky was covered. A black cloud with a radius of hundreds of miles hung above the dojo. There were hundreds of miles of gray clouds in the sky, making the world dark. Many of the disciples felt uneasy and curious at the sight of such a drastic change in the world. Many of the disciples were awakened and gathered in groups of 3 to 5, discussing what was going on. Not long after, the black cloud formed a huge tribulation cloud vortex, flashing with all kinds of lightning. Many disciples then realized that someone was going through the tribulation. Therefore, everyone rushed to the dojo from all directions to observe the process of others going through the tribulation. In a short while, dozens of disciples gathered around the dojo. At this moment, lightning flashed in the tribulation cloud vortex, and the first bolt of lightning struck. Kaboom! Accompanied by the deafening roar of thunder, 4 different colored lightning pillars fiercely struck Ji Tianxing, who was in the middle of the field. Gold, red, blue, and purple lightning represented the power of different attributes. They were mysterious and powerful. Just as I expected, this is my 4th tribulation. There were 4 bolts of lightning at the beginning, then 8, 16, 32. Ji Tianxing stood on the dojo and looked at the sky calmly, muttering to himself. When the lightning tore through the dark sky and struck above his head, he waved his hand and shot out a golden light. Swoosh! The sacred and dazzling golden light formed a giant vortex with a radius of 3,000 meters above his head. The 4 bolts of heavenly lightning were immediately swallowed up by the golden vortex and disappeared without a trace. The whole process was very fast, and Ji Tianxing's movements were also very relaxed. He swallowed the 4 bolts of lightning in the blink of an eye. It was easier than drinking water. Next, the tribulation cloud vortex spun faster, and the second bolt of lightning struck. Just as Ji Tianxing expected, there were 8 bolts of lightning this time, and they were still of 4 colors and attributes. Kaboom! The sound of thunder echoed in the sky, shaking hundreds of miles of land. However, when the 8 bolts of lightning struck Ji Tianxing's head, they were immediately swallowed by the golden vortex. Not a single bolt of lightning leaked out. He stood in the middle of the dojo with a calm expression, his robe as white as snow. Next, the 3rd bolt of lightning struck, and 16 bolts of lightning struck at the same time. But the result was still the golden vortex swallowed the bolts of lightning again. After the 3rd round of heavenly thunder, the tribulation cloud vortex began to change, brewing an even more powerful heavenly thunder. The disciples around the dojo had long been dumbfounded. They exclaimed and discussed among themselves. It's young Master Ji. Young Master Ji tribulation. Oh my God. Young Master Ji is he? Didn't he tribulation Ji? Oh my God, am I seeing things? Tribulation for 2 months. Could it be that he didn't finish his tribulation last time, so he's continuing this time? Hey! Why would I have such a weird idea? Are you out of your mind? This is unbelievable. Young Master G's tribulation lightning struck 4, 8, and 16 bolts of lightning at the same time. Isn't it terrifying that the lightning strikes would double every time? Aside from young Master G, I have never heard of anyone else tribulation G. Did the heavens change the rules of the tribulation for young Master G? Young Master G was able to neutralize such a terrifying heavenly lightning so easily. This is simply unbelievable. No wonder he is the successor of our founder, Kenshin. He is a rare talent. With young Master G inheriting our founder's martial skills, our pillar of Heaven's Mountain will prosper. Yes. With young Master G's speed of growth, he will be able to break through to the martial sage realm soon. By then, our sect will have 2 martial sages. More than 100 Tribulation Cloud Vortex disciples gathered around the dojo and discussed excitedly. They were excited and excited. Ji Tianxing's strength and talent made everyone see hope for the pillar of Heaven's Mountain. The disciples were more united and had greater hopes for the pillar of Heaven's Mountain. They were also more loyal. This was what Ji Tianxing wanted to see. It was also the reason why he had gone through the tribulation in front of everyone. After a while, the Tribulation Cloud Vortex completed its transformation and struck down the 4th bolt of lightning. Kaboom! The sound of thunder shook the clouds and reverberated in the sky, causing the pillar of Heaven's Mountain to shake. 32 bolts of lightning that were 1,000 feet long came down from the Tribulation Cloud Vortex. They were arranged in a mysterious array and struck down on Ji Tianxing. Every bolt of lightning was colorful. Other than gold, red, blue and purple, there was a 5th color, black. The disciples around the dojo had never seen black lightning before and they all exclaimed in shock. However, Ji Tianxing knew very well that black lightning was the rarest and the most terrifying type of lightning. Black lightning represented annihilation. He frowned slightly and raised his arms with a grave expression. He waved his palms and sword radiance filled the sky. Shoosh shoosh shoosh. A total of 49 giant golden swords formed a sword array and flew into the sky, striking down on the 32 bolts of lightning. The lightning and sword radiance collided, creating a loud sound that shook the universe and splashing out endless dazzling light. Kaboom! The 5-colored lightning and the giant golden swords shattered at the same time, turning into millions of light fragments that fell from the sky like a colorful rain. Ji Tianxing defeated the lightning and stood in the middle of the dojo unscathed. Next, the 5th and 6th bolts of lightning struck down. 64 and 128 bolts of lightning struck down from the Tribulation Cloud Vortex. The destructive lightning struck down and flooded the dojo within 100 miles, turning the entire dojo into a world of lightning. The disciples around the dojo were also shocked by the terrifying power. They were so scared that their faces turned pale and they retreated in fear. Finally, the 6th bolt of lightning ended and the Tribulation Cloud Vortex changed again. Ji Tianxing stood in the sky calmly and looked up at the Tribulation Cloud Vortex, waiting quietly. 100 breaths later, the Tribulation Cloud Vortex completed its transformation and turned into a thick blood-red color. The 7th bolt of lightning was the inner demon tribulation. A 1,000-foot-long blood-red bolt of lightning struck down and turned into a huge blood-red light ball, enveloping Ji Tianxing. Ji Tianxing was fearless and calmly accepted the test of the inner demon tribulation. The 7th inner demon tribulation and the 8th tribulation of wind and fire were no longer a challenge for him. He was most looking forward to and curious about the last bolt of lightning. The 3 heavenly tribulations he had experienced before were the 7 emotions tribulation, reincarnation tribulation, and spacetime tribulation. Today was the 4th heavenly tribulation. Chapter 1938. The dark red ball of light enveloped Ji Tianxing for an entire hour. The inner demon tribulation this time was exceptionally long. Ji Tianxing endured all kinds of tests in the inner demon dream. However, after an hour, he still passed through without any mishaps. The blood-red ball of light gradually dissipated. He also opened his eyes, exuding a powerful and majestic aura. Every inner demon tribulation was an extremely dangerous tribulation. The slightest mistake could turn one into ashes. However, after he passed the tribulation, he would face his heart and be able to see the memories in the depths of his soul. Those were imprints that could not be erased by time and reincarnation. Ji Tianxing looked up at the tribulation cloud vortex high in the sky, and the corners of his mouth curled up into a sneer. It seemed to be contempt, and also seemed to be mocking. There was also a hint of frivolity and arrogance. No one knew what he had experienced. No one knew what he was feeling at this moment. Kaboom! Thunder exploded, and the 8th heavenly lightning descended. The 1,000-feet-long 5-colored heavenly lightning struck Ji Tianxing like a divine dragon descending into the world. The 5-colored lightning fire that illuminated the world enveloped Ji Tianxing and burned him crazily. He stood in the air with a calm expression, enduring the torture of the heavenly wind, astral fire, and lightning. He once again used the tribulation of wind and fire to temper his body. His body had already reached the peak of the tribulation transcendent stage and was extremely close to the limit. However, he was still unwilling to give up any opportunity to temper his body. Because he knew that the true limit was, there would never be a limit. 1,000 years ago, he had traveled in the dragon realm for many years, increasing his extensive experience and knowledge. He knew that among the tens of thousands of races in the universe, the dragon clan had the strongest physical body and the most powerful divine ability. In a fair battle with the same strength and realm, almost no race could surpass the dragon clan in combat strength. Among the dragon clan's secret techniques, there was a strange and unconventional ultimate skill that could allow one to become a god with their physical body. Without cultivating martial arts or dharma spells, one could also reach the god realm by continuously tempering their body with various methods and infinitely increasing their physical strength. Moreover, this kind of powerhouse whose physical body had become a god could easily crush opponents of the same realm. In his previous life, Ji Tianxing had been inspired by this and had also tried to cultivate this technique. Unfortunately, the effects were not great. It was far inferior to his cultivation of the sword Dao, which allowed him to increase his strength faster. However, things were different now. He had been reborn and had experienced 9 heavenly tribulations. He wanted to use the terrifying power of the heavenly tribulation to refine his physical body, continuously excavate his own potential, and expand his limit. Although he was the reincarnation of Kenshin, he would not follow the same old path. He wanted to make up for his regrets and try a cultivation method that he had never tried before. He wanted to create a brand new path of martial arts. Unknowingly, another 2 hours passed. Ji Tianxing endured all kinds of torment and finally succeeded in tempering his body, causing the strength of his body to double. He unearthed even more potential and pushed his limits even further. After the great tribulation of wind and fire dissipated, the tribulation cloud vortex churned violently again, and the 9th heavenly thunder descended. Boom! Following a thunderous roar that resounded throughout the universe, a huge 5-colored light beam came crashing down. At that moment, the entire pillar of heaven's mountains was illuminated by the 5-colored light, turning into a dazzling world of light. Countless disciples could not open their eyes because of the blinding light. It was as if they had been blinded and could not see anything. After the dazzling 5-colored light beam struck Ji Tianxing, it turned into a ball of light that was dozens of miles wide and enveloped him. After a long time, the 5-colored light that illuminated the world slowly dissipated. Only a ball of light with a radius of 25 miles was left floating quietly in the sky above the training ground. Everyone was bewildered. They were shocked and puzzled as they whispered to each other. No one knew what was hidden in the 9th heavenly thunder. At this moment, Ji Tianxing was trapped in the endless void, standing on a huge disk. This 5-colored disk array was thousands of miles wide, like a lone island in the dark void. The multicolored light was the majestic 5-element spiritual qi, which circulated endlessly. Ji Tianxing stood in the middle of the 5 elements disk array, calmly observing the situation around him, wondering what kind of test this was. The 5-element spirit qi formed the disk array and hung alone in the void. Other than that, there is nothing else. Could this test be the 5 elements tribulation? As Ji Tianxing pondered, he stepped over the 5 elements disk array and flew toward the edge. Soon, he flew to the edge of the disk array and stood still, looking at the void in front of him and observing carefully. There was no temperature, air, or spirit qi in the dark void, and there were no living things. There was only endless coldness and silence, as well as terrifying void storms, turbulence, and black holes. Even martial sages could not travel through the void, let alone stay in the void for a long time. Otherwise, they would lose their lives. Only when one reached the martial god realm would one be qualified to travel through the void and cross the entire star region. Even if one encountered a void storm or turbulence, one would be qualified to fight back and have a chance to escape. Ji Tianxing relied on his strong physical body and tried to step into the void. He wanted to see if there was anything else in the void other than the 5 elements disc array. However, as soon as he stepped into the void, he was bounced back by an invisible divine power and flew hundreds of feet away. He was unwilling to give up and tried a few more times, but all of them ended in failure. Moreover, he was injured by the invisible divine power and blood flowed out of his mouth and nose. There was no doubt that he was trapped in the 5 elements disc array and could not leave at all. Unless he could resolve the 5 elements tribulation. He calmed down and observed carefully. Soon, he discovered that there was a faint light in the depths of the void. He quickly performed the God's Eye secret skill and his eyes turned golden as he stared into the depths of the void. After observing for a while, he realized that the light was the pillar of Heaven's mountain. He could see the scene at the peak of the pillar of Heaven's mountain. There were many palaces and mansions, and many disciples were watching and discussing at the edge of the dojo. Ji Tianxing frowned and thought for a while. He immediately understood. I am trapped in the 5 elements disc array. The outside world is the peak of the pillar of Heaven's mountain, and there is an impassable void in between. If I can't resolve the 5 elements tribulation, I will be trapped here and may even die. Only by crossing the void can I leave the 5 elements disc array and return to the peak of the pillar of Heaven's mountain. But how can I resolve the 5 elements tribulation? How can I cross the void? Ji Tianxing looked at the scene in the depths of the void and then looked at the 5 elements disc array under his feet. He frowned and pondered. After a while, an idea flashed through his mind and he suddenly had an idea. That's right. The power of the 5 elements is the source of all things in the universe. I have not recovered to the immortal state, so I can't create things out of nothing. But I can use the power of the 5 elements disc array to create real mountains, rivers, flowers, and trees to fill the dark void. Chapter 1939. Ji Tianxing no longer hesitated when he thought of a way to resolve the 5 elements tribulation. He flew to the center of the 5 elements formation plate and sat cross-legged in it. He started to cast spells with both hands. Under his control, the 5 elements spirit chi in the 5 colors formation plate started to flow faster. Pillars of 5-colored light flew out and circled around his body like swimming dragons. Vast heaven and earth, sun and moon, 5 elements extremes, creation and rebirth. Ji Tianxing shouted with a serious face. He waved his hand and hundreds of 5 colors light flew into the void at the edge of the formation plate. Swoosh swoosh swoosh. When the 5 colors light landed in the void, a magical change immediately occurred. The dark yellow earth spirit chi quickly condensed into yellow soil and rocks. It spread in all directions and formed a vast land. The power of the 5 elements was activated. Fire, wood, earth, and became an even more turbulent earth spirit chi. The dark yellow land grew wildly and grew at an extremely fast speed. It formed a mound and then a mountain peak. Ji Tianxing continued to cast spells and controlled the power of the 5 elements formation plate to continuously inject it into the void. The small mountain that was 100 feet tall also grew rapidly and became a more majestic mountain peak. It also spread into the depths of the void. At the same time, green grass, vines, and saplings began to appear on the bare mountain peak. They grew at an incredible speed. Time passed silently, and 2 hours passed very quickly. In the void at the edge of the formation plate, the original mountain peak had become a lush green mountain range. It extended for hundreds of miles and continued to spread into the depths of the void. Ji Tianxing was still sitting in the middle of the formation plate. He waved his hand and cast spells with a serious expression to control the 5 elements spirit chi. The power of the 5 elements formation plate was endless, as if it would never be exhausted. After 6 hours, the mountain range had grown to more than 400 miles. It was only 300 miles away from the light in the depths of the void. Ji Tianxing cast spells continuously for 6 hours. He had been creating things out of thin air as if he was creating a miracle. His divine soul had been greatly consumed, and his expression was already somewhat tired. Fine beads of sweat had also appeared on his forehead. Unknowingly, another 4 hours passed. The majestic green mountain range had stretched for more than 800 miles. It finally crossed the dark void and came into contact with the light. Ji Tianxing breathed a sigh of relief and slowly ended the spell. Shua. The 5 elements array disk lit up with a dazzling brilliance and turned into a huge vortex, enveloping Ji Tianxing. The majestic 5 elements spiritual qi surged into his body like a torrential flood. Without a doubt, he had successfully resolved the 5 elements tribulation. This was a reward from the heavenly Tao. He accepted the 5 elements spiritual qi with open arms and converted it into magic power, quickly increasing his strength. After a short 15 minutes, his body was filled with the 5 elements spiritual qi. Even if he compressed his magic power by 5 times, he was still unable to contain any more magic power. He had already reached his limit. However, he had only devoured 20% of the spiritual qi. The remaining 80% of the spiritual qi would be wasted. Thus, he used his mind to control the heaven-mending pearl in his mind and crazily devoured the 5 elements spiritual qi. This method was indeed effective. The tiny heaven-mending bead was like a bottomless pit. Very quickly, it devoured all of the 5 elements spiritual energy. The heaven-mending pearl became even more dazzling, and its power increased by several times. However, Ji Tianxing could feel that the 5 elements spiritual qi was just an appetizer to the heaven-mending pearl. Even if there were 10 or 20 times more spiritual qi, it would still be able to devour it. The 5-colored array disk gradually disappeared. Ji Tianxing also turned around and left in satisfaction. He stepped onto the majestic mountain range and walked along the lush mountain range towards the depths of the void. After 100 breaths of time, he reached the end of the mountain range and stepped into the light. Shua. With a flash of light, he seemed to have passed through a light curtain or a 5-colored mirror. He left the world of the void and returned to the peak of the pillar of heaven's mountains. He appeared in the sky above the training hall, safe and sound. His strength had increased by 2 times. At the same time, the 5-colored light in the sky dissipated. The 5 elements tribulation had completely ended. The tribulation cloud vortex high in the sky also turned into a sacred golden light that descended from the sky and enveloped Ji Tianxing's figure. His body had already accumulated too much 5 elements spiritual qi and could not contain more magic power for the time being. However, this sacred golden light was a special kind of divine power. After entering his body, it poured into his divine soul and quickly strengthened his divine soul. In just 100 breaths of time, his divine soul had expanded by 3 times, and his sea of consciousness had also become wider. After the strengthening of his divine soul, it had also reached the limit, which was just right for his magic power and physical body. Moreover, the benefits of the strengthening of his divine soul were obvious. His divine sense was more powerful and could cover a radius of 500 miles. It was meticulous. His sea of consciousness could contain more information. His aptitude and comprehension had also improved a lot. His reaction was also faster. All in all, Ji Tianxing successfully passed the heavenly tribulation and reached the 4th stage of the tribulation stage. His strength had increased by more than 3 times compared to before. When he refined the sacred golden light and opened his eyes shot out a sharp golden light. His whole body also exuded a majestic and domineering aura. The disciples around the training hall were still immersed in shock, surprise, and discussion. Feeling Ji Tianxing's majestic and domineering aura, everyone's body trembled. Their hearts were filled with deep reverence, and they naturally bowed down to salute him. Congratulations to young Master Ji for successfully passing the heavenly tribulation. Congratulations to young Master Ji for achieving great success. Countless people saluted in unison and shouted with heartfelt admiration. Ji Tianxing looked around with a majestic gaze, then withdrew his gaze, stepped across the sky, and left the training hall. Under the gaze of everyone, he returned to the Heaven Pillar Palace. He had to meditate for 2 days to refine the 5-element spiritual chi stored in his body and stabilize his martial arts foundation. Otherwise, when the spiritual chi stored in his body reached the limit, his combat power would be greatly reduced, and he might explode at any time. After he left, the disciples in the training hall were still unwilling to leave. They still gathered in groups of 3 to 5, discussing what had happened before. What they saw today had refreshed everyone's understanding of the heavenly tribulation. It was really an eye-opener. Many disciples were sighing with emotion. To be able to witness such a unique and powerful heavenly tribulation with their own eyes was definitely the greatest fortune in their lives. To be able to watch a monstrous genius like Ji Tianqing undergo the heavenly tribulation and observe the process clearly was not only a blessing, but also a great help and inspiration. Everyone was full of admiration for Ji Tianqing, and they were all looking forward to him breaking through to the martial saint realm and taking over the position of sect master. At that time, Tianzhu Mountain would have 2 martial saints overseeing it, as well as the number 1 genius since ancient times. Tianzhu Mountain would definitely become famous throughout the Shunwu continent and create a new era of glory. With such feelings and expectations, everyone was full of hope and longing for Tianzhu Mountain's future. Chapter 1940. 2 days passed in the blink of an eye. Ji Tianqing had been meditating in the secret chamber for 2 days. He had already converted all the spiritual energy in his body. His martial arts foundation had been stabilized, and his strength had also increased steadily. He had reached his peak state. That night, after he finished his cultivation, he ordered Ji Bai to send a message to the Huanglong Daoist for an audience. After a while, the Huanglong Daoist came to the secret chamber. Disciple greets master. Congratulations on successfully passing the tribulation. Your strength has increased by another level. The Huanglong Daoist cupped his hands and said respectfully. Ji Tianqing raised his hand, indicating for him to stand up and speak. He asked, "You have been busy with the mission for the past 10 days. How is the result?" The Huanglong Daoist showed a gratified expression and reported, "Master, don't worry. Things are going well. This disciple has already pacified the other disciples and doubled the amount of cultivation resources. In addition, Master has passed the tribulation in front of everyone. The disciples are even more excited and in high spirits. Now, the disciples are very united. They are all looking forward to the sect's development and revival of its glory. As for the 9 sects and 18 schools, I have also gathered the leaders of the sects and made them rules and agreements. After 2 rounds of negotiations, the sects have accepted the agreement to cooperate in attack and defense. In addition, Master said that there will be rewards based on merit. This has greatly boosted the morale of the sects. They are quite interested." After listening to the Huanglong Daoist's report, Ji Tianqing was relieved. He said in a serious tone, "Huanglong, you will stay in Tianzhu Mountain. You must be strict and protect the safety of the sect. I have to go out to do something. I am afraid that I will only be back in a month or 2. The Huanglong Daoist was startled. He asked doubtfully, "Master, the situation in Tianzhu Mountain has already stabilized. What else do you have to do? Why do you have to go out for so long?" Ji Tianqing explained in a low voice, "The North Underworld Mountain has created another batch of blood gods' illusions. They are perfect, peerless, murderous weapons. They are rushing to the battlefield in the north of the Luo Shui god nation. Once those blood gods' illusions join the battlefield, they will definitely cause a huge wave of blood and create a shocking tragedy. I must personally take action and try to kill that batch of blood gods' sons. I can't let them rush to the northern border battlefield." When Huanglong Daoist heard this, he immediately shook his head and said worriedly, "Master, are you going to act alone?" "Absolutely not. It was too dangerous. Moreover, the Luo Shui divine nation is powerful, and they will find a way to resolve the crisis. There is no need for you to do anything. You only need to send this news to the Luo Shui god nation. Why do you have to take the risk yourself?" In short, this disciple does not agree to let you go unless you let this disciple follow and protect you. Ji Tianqing looked at him with a solemn expression and said in a dignified tone, "Huanglong, wasn't the lesson from before enough? How can you and I leave at the same time? Someone had to stay behind to guard Tianzhu Mountain." Moreover, I know the blood god the best. Only I can kill that group of blood god's illusions. The Luoshui divine nation was indeed powerful, but they were too busy defending themselves and were unable to completely destroy the blood god. We can't just sit by and watch. We have to attack the demons from both sides at the right time. If the Luoshui god nation were to fall, the Luoshui god nation would not be the only one to suffer. The demon's next target would be our Tianzhu mountain. I believe you understand the principle of being cold without the lips. Huanglong Daoist hesitated for a moment, and still unwillingly persuaded, Master, this disciple understands what you mean, but this disciple is really worried about you going alone. Without waiting for him to finish, Ji Tianxing waved his hand and interrupted him. He said resolutely, Master has already made up his mind. You don't have to say any more. Huanglong Daoist sighed silently. He could only bow and say, this disciple understands. Master, please rest assured that this disciple will protect the Tianzhu mountain without any mistakes. However, Master, please be extra careful when you act and ensure your own safety. Master understands. Ji Tianxing nodded and waved his hand, indicating for him to leave. Huanglong Daoist bowed and left the secret room. Ji Tianxing left the Tianzhu palace alone and came to the center of the training hall. The burial of heaven flew out from the sword steely and turned into a black light that entered his arm. Then, he flew into the sky alone and left the Tianzhu mountain. As for the onyx dragon and Qian Yu, they were still cultivating in the star furnace. After all, they were about to undergo their tribulations, so cultivating in the Tianzhu mountain was the right thing to do. After leaving the Tianzhu mountain, Ji Tianxing sped through the sky and headed east. A few million kilometers to the southeast, past the 100,000 mountains, was the border of the Luoshui god nation. 3 million kilometers to the east was the Dark North Mountain where the demons resided. Ji Tianxing estimated that by the time he reached the vicinity of the Dark North Mountain, the blood god scions would have already left and would be on their way to the Luoshui god nation. Thus, he sped through the sky while taking out a map to check the route. On the specially made golden paper map, the layout of the Shunwu continent was marked in detail. This was especially true for the three divine kingdoms, Dark North Mountain, the Ruins of God, and the Tianzhu Mountain. The distance from the Dark North Mountain to the northern border of the Luoshui god nation was roughly 3 million kilometers. He would definitely pass by Whitebone Mountain, Myriad Poison Valley, Dark Cloud Mountain, and Soulbreak Cliff. Ji Tianxing memorized the route and silently calculated, with the blood god scion's speed, they should reach the Dark Cloud Mountain in 20 days. I'll be there by then as well. If they're traveling on a tribulation-grade flying ship, they'll definitely be near Soulbreak Cliff in 20 days. If that's the case, I'll rush to Soulbreak Cliff to kill them. After making up his mind, Ji Tianxing put away the map and rushed east with all his might. For the next 20 days, Ji Tianxing traveled at full speed. During this time, he passed through the 100,000 mountains and traveled more than 5 million kilometers. Although this vast and desolate mountain range hid countless vicious beasts, there was no lack of peak tribulation-grade powerhouses among them. However, his speed was too fast, and his aura was concealed very well. Ordinary beasts would find it difficult to detect him. Even if some peak tribulation-grade beasts could sense his aura, they would not dare to attack him rashly, let alone catch up to him. The journey was daunting but not dangerous. It was safe and smooth. On the evening of the 21st day, when the sun was setting, Ji Tianxing finally arrived at Soulbreak Cliff. Soulbreak Cliff was one of the most dangerous forbidden areas in the 100,000 mountains. Almost no martial artists or adventurers would come here. It was only a few 100,000 kilometers away from the northern border of the Luoshui divine nation. Ji Tianxing arrived near Soulbreak Cliff and slowed down his flying speed. He used the chaotic heaven secret technique to hide his aura. He traveled through the clouds and silently observed the situation below. He saw undulating mountain ranges in all directions. In the dark green mountain range, there were peaks that were thousands of feet tall every few meters. The peaks were steep and straight. The peaks were covered by white clouds and thick fog, and they were faintly discernible. The mountains were covered by thick clouds, and the light was rather dim. The setting sun could barely shine on them. The mountains were abnormally quiet, and it was a little strange. As for the famous Soulbreak Cliff, it was, of course, a cliff that was tens of thousands of feet deep. From the front, it was a towering mountain that was 20,000 feet tall. Chapter 1941. In Ji Tianxing's opinion, the Broken Soul Cliff's name was very intimidating. However, it was probably just an undeserved reputation. This kind of forbidden area was either occupied by powerful ferocious beasts, contained hundreds of deadly poisons, or had the power of a natural array. There were all kinds of forbidden areas in the world, and there were only a few possibilities. For ordinary martial artists, the Broken Soul Cliff was a terrifying forbidden area of death. However, for him, it was like walking on flat ground. He quietly came to the sky above the Broken Soul Cliff, hid in the thick clouds, and silently used the Celestial Chaos secret technique. In the blink of an eye, his body became transparent and disappeared into the sky. He merged with the heaven and earth and explored everything around the Broken Soul Cliff. Soon, he figured out the situation. Haha, as I expected, there are two ferocious beasts on the mountain, and there is a natural array power hidden in the cliff, as well as highly toxic miasma and poisonous fog. As for the bottom of the cliff, it's actually blocked by a layer of invisible force, and even my divine sense can't penetrate it. These thoughts flashed through Ji Tianxing's mind. He immediately ended the spell and revealed his true body. Swoosh! He appeared on the peak of the towering mountain and looked down at the bottomless abyss below. He frowned with a serious expression. How interesting! Not only does this Broken Soul Cliff contain the three kinds of dangers that I guessed, but it also has such a mysterious array power. My divine sense can't penetrate it. Could it be a saint-level array? Anyway, the demon warriors and the blood god haven't arrived yet. I'll check the situation first. Ji Tianxing made up his mind to enter the Broken Soul Cliff and find out what was going on. However, just as he was about to leave the peak, a low roar came from the forest behind him. Roar. The muffled roar reverberated through the mountain peak, causing the mountain peak to tremble and the forest to sway. Two dangerous auras came and were approaching at an extremely fast speed. Ji Tianxing raised his eyebrows, and murderous intent flashed in his eyes. He muttered to himself, no matter how small the trouble is, it's still trouble. I have to get rid of it first. After saying that, he slowly turned and looked at the forest not far away. Two gigantic beasts that were as sturdy as small mountains flew out of the dense, dark green forest. Both beasts were over 1,000 feet tall. They were grayish-brown in color and covered in hard scales. They looked a little like giant apes, with thick limbs and long tails. Their heads were large and square, and their scarlet eyes were like flames. However, they had black wings on their backs and dark red lava cracks all over their bodies, making them look like rare earth dragon lava beasts. As the two giant beasts crossed the forest, the surrounding towering trees were shattered into pieces and scattered on the ground. Dong dong dong, heavy footsteps could be heard, shaking the entire mountain peak. The two of them walked until they were about 100 feet away from Ji Tianxing and stopped. They looked down at him with bloodthirsty eyes. Without a doubt, these were two ferocious beasts with violent and bloodthirsty temperaments. Their strength had also reached the 4th level of the Tribulation Transcendence realm, and they were not to be trifled with. If an ordinary martial artist came here and encountered these two giant beasts, the only outcome would be death. They wouldn't even have the chance to escape. Only famous martial lords had a chance of survival. The two giant beasts spread out and surrounded Ji Tianxing from the left and right. Their eyes revealed ridicule. In their eyes, Ji Tianxing was so weak that he would definitely die. Before killing Ji Tianxing, they wanted to tease him and have some fun. After all, very few people passed by the Breaking Soul Cliff. Even if they did, they would avoid it. Ji Tianxing glanced at the two giant beasts expressionlessly. He didn't waste any time and directly attacked. He stretched out his right hand and a black light flashed in his palm. The sword of burial of heaven appeared in his palm. Whoosh! He held the sword of burial of heaven in his right hand and swung it at the giant beast on the left. A crescent-shaped sword light about 100 feet wide appeared. The sword of burial of heaven's 9 swords. The sudden silver-white sword light was condensed by the divine starfire. It was as bright and flawless as a crescent moon. The dark sky and the mountain peak were illuminated by the silver-white moonlight. The speed of the sword light was too fast. It was so fast that the giant beast didn't have time to dodge and its thick neck was cut. Bang! With a muffled sound, the 10-foot thick grayish-brown neck was directly cut off by the sword light. A huge head flew into the sky. A dark red column of blood spurted out from the neck like magma. With just one sword, the giant beast in the fourth stage of the tribulation stage was instantly killed. Plop! The hill-like body fell to the ground with a bang. The huge head also hit the ground, making a muffled sound. The ground trembled a few times and a large cloud of dust splashed out. Whoosh! A dark red divine soul flew out of the head and fled down the mountain in horror. However, Ji Tianxing waved his right hand and swung out another sword light. Bang! The dark red soul was hit by the sword light and exploded on the spot, turning into a large cloud of red mist. The sword of burial of heaven burst out with an invisible devouring power and immediately swallowed the red mist. For it, the souls of tribulation stage powerhouses and demonic beasts were also good nourishment. The other giant beast was scared silly by this series of changes before it could attack. It obviously didn't expect that the seemingly weak white-robed human would be so powerful that he could kill its companion with just 2 swords. It was scared out of its wits and trembled all over. Knowing that it had provoked a strong enemy that it shouldn't have, it didn't hesitate to turn around and fly away after coming to its senses. It flapped its black wings desperately, bursting out dazzling flames. It used the teleportation technique to escape from the Broken Soul Cliff. However, Ji Tianxing was already ready to attack. He swung out a golden sword light. Heaven-breaking sword. The 100-foot-long giant sword flew out like a thunderbolt tearing the sky, illuminating the mountain peak brightly. Bang! Just as the giant beast was about to teleport, it was hit by the giant sword and made a muffled sound. The sword light passed through its body and flew dozens of miles away before dissipating. A dark red line of blood extended from the top of its head down, along its neck and back, to its legs. Then, its body split open from the middle and split into 2 halves with a bang, spraying out a large amount of blood. Plop! The 2 halves of the corpse fell to the ground, causing the earth to tremble, but there was no more sound. Ji Tianxing's sword not only destroyed its physical body, but also accurately shattered its soul. After easily dealing with the 2 giant beasts, Ji Tianxing threw a few balls of star divine fire on the giant beast's corpse. Immediately, the giant beast's corpse burned and was quickly burned into nothingness by the star divine fire. In this way, there wouldn't be any corpses or bloodstains left on the mountain peak to avoid attracting more demonic beasts. If the demon race warriors and the blood god's son passed by, they wouldn't notice anything unusual and would take precautions in advance. After destroying the corpses, Ji Tianxing held the sword of burial of heaven and stepped into the bottomless abyss. He stepped in the air, passed through the dark clouds and poisonous fog, and flew toward the bottom of the cliff. His body had been refined hundreds of times and was already immune to all poisons. It was comparable to the body of a martial sage. The poisonous miasma and fog below the Broken Soul Cliff couldn't threaten him at all. Even the invisible strangling power released by the natural formation below the cliff was ignored by him. Chapter 1942. After a while, Ji Tianxing came to the bottom of the cliff. It was dark all around and the air was cold and still. It was filled with the aura of death. There was a faint light above his head. However, as the sun set, the faint light also disappeared. Ji Tianxing held the sword of burial of heaven and stood in the dark sky. He looked at his feet with his golden eyes. It was dark and there seemed to be nothing under his feet. In fact, there was a layer of invisible force floating in the air like a membrane. This membrane was incomparably sturdy and dangerous. It contained a destructive power. Before he knew what was going on, Ji Tianxing did not dare to touch the membrane in case he was in danger. He used the God's Eye secret skill to observe the invisible membrane. The scene in front of him quickly changed. He saw through the disguise and saw the essence of the force. Tens of thousands of black lines were floating in the pitch-black sky, intertwining with each other. Every black line was as thin as a hair, but it contained the power to tear everything apart. It was chilling. Hundreds of millions of black lines were intertwined and mixed together. It was like a huge protective net in the abyss. Ji Tianxing could vaguely feel that the aura of those black lines was somewhat familiar. He released his spiritual consciousness to check it out. However, when his spiritual consciousness touched the black lines, it was cut off and his spiritual soul felt a sharp pain. Of course, this pain was nothing to him. He frowned and thought for a while. Then, he came to a conclusion. I understand now. It is the power of the void. He had already experienced the power of the void countless times. Even a martial sage could only stay in the void for a short time and could not survive for a long time. The net formed by the power of the void was more like a wall of death than a protective net. Once a martial artist below the martial sage realm touched the empty space net, he would be sliced into pieces and would die without leaving any trace behind. No wonder the broken soul cliff is said to be so scary. No matter how strong the adventurers are, they do not dare to come here. Any cultivator below the martial saint realm who comes into contact with this void net will not be able to survive and will definitely die. Ji Tianxing frowned and muttered to himself in a low voice. At this moment, Burial of Heaven's voice sounded in his mind. This is just a cliff. Why would the power of the void appear and form a net? Aren't you going to go through this net and find out what's going on below? Ji Tianxing thought for a moment and nodded. You're right. I also thought of this problem just now. Why would a void net appear here for no reason? Looking at the way this void net is condensed, it doesn't seem to be controlled by someone. It seems to be formed naturally and repaired by the heavenly Tao. The so-called restoration of the heavenly Tao, only deity realm powerhouses understood what it meant. To put it simply, this world was enveloped by the heavenly Tao and operated under the will of the heavenly Tao. If a martial god realm expert fought and broke the sky, creating a spatial crack, revealing a gap in the void. In that case, the spatial rift would not continue to expand, and it would naturally heal under the power of the heavenly Tao. It was because of this that this world could exist for a long time. Otherwise, after the countless battles of the gods over the past tens of thousands of years, this world would have been shattered and completely destroyed by the gods. Burial of Heaven was silent for a moment before it said, since the heavenly Tao repaired it, it means that there's something strange about this place. There's most likely a spatial crack under the void net that connects to the void outside. As long as it's a spatial crack, it either hides a huge secret or an opportunity, or it's a peerless danger. Ji Tianxing nodded and said calmly, with our knowledge and means, even walking in the void is not a problem. However, I have to set up some ambushes and traps to deal with the demon warriors and the blood god. As for the situation under the void net, it won't be too late to investigate after I've dealt with the blood god. Burial of Heaven agreed. That's good. Let's get down to business. After a while, it asked again, what kind of trap are you going to set? If it's some kind of big formation, I'm afraid it won't work. Soul-breaking cliff is notorious. The demon warriors and the blood god won't look for trouble and will definitely take a detour. Ji Tianxing's lips curled into a playful smile. He asked with his spiritual sense, against a large number of demon warriors and the blood god, of course a formation is the most effective. I can't kill them one by one, right? Ordinary formations can't be moved, so it's difficult to be effective. But don't forget, I once used a kind of formation that can be moved. With his reminder, Burial of Heaven recalled for a moment and suddenly understood. Are you talking about the dragon elephant heavenly seal? That ancient formation that uses oneself as a carrier? Ji Tianxing nodded and said, yes, it's the dragon elephant heavenly seal, a unique secret technique of the dragon race. Speaking of the dragon elephant heavenly seal, he couldn't help but smile, his eyes filled with memories. Among the thousands of races in the universe, the dragon race is the most eccentric. They're proficient in all kinds of self-abuse and self-harm secret techniques, but they're also unreasonably powerful. They crazily temper their dragon bodies and use self-harm to become gods. They use their own dragon blood to water spiritual herbs, use their own dragon bones to refine pills, or refine divine artifacts and magic treasures. They also use themselves as formation discs to set up formations, use their own dragon scales to refine talismans or armor, I even suspect that those old dragons who have lived for tens of thousands of years will be so bored that they'll slice themselves up for fun. Speaking of this, Ji Tianxing couldn't help but laugh, his face full of ridicule. Burial of Heaven was silent for a moment, then replied seriously, I think it's very possible. Cough cough. Ji Tianxing pretended to cough twice and ended the topic. We're off topic. I'll set up the dragon elephant heavenly seal first. When I form the formation myself, I'll be the best bait. I'll definitely be able to trap and kill those blood gods. Burial of Heaven reminded in a serious tone, this is very dangerous. Once you can't hold on, you'll die on the spot. You have to think carefully. Don't worry, I have the chaotic heaven secret technique and the heaven mending pearl as a carrier. There's no danger at all. Ji Tianxing waved his hand confidently and said, I'll set up the formation, and you protect me. I hope that those demons will come later, and give me enough time to complete the dragon elephant heavenly seal. After saying that, Ji Tianxing flew out of the broken soul cliff and landed on the peak of the mountain. He sat cross-legged on the ground, closed his eyes, and began to cast the technique. He waved his palm, and a 5-colored brilliance filled the sky, scattering into heaven and earth. Burial of Heaven flew high into the sky, secretly monitoring the movements in the surroundings. The dragon elephant heavenly seal secret technique was very strange. It required one to use one's body as a formation disk to construct the network of the formation between heaven and earth, and then form a heavenly seal formation. Once the formation was formed, Ji Tianxing would be a moving formation. Wherever he went, the surrounding 100 miles would be covered by the formation. Of course, to complete the dragon elephant heavenly seal, one must have powerful magic power, a sturdy and strong enough body, and one must also merge with heaven and earth. Chapter 1943. Deep into the night. North of Broken Soul Cliff, about 200 kilometers away, a black flying ship that was 300 meters long was speeding through the night sky. The flying ship's shape was somewhat strange and sinister. The body of the ship was completely black, and many sinister and terrifying demon patterns and symbols were engraved on it. At the bow of the ship stood a mast that was more than 100 meters tall. It was actually made of grey bones, and a flag hung from the top. The flag was engraved with a sinister demon pattern and a complicated skull symbol. It was the insignia of Dark North Mountain. The flying ship was like a ghost, flying through the sky at an extremely fast speed, but it was also silent. This flying ship was a high-grade tribulation magic treasure. The interior of the flying ship was very spacious, and it was divided into several distinct regions. Near the bow of the ship was a heavily guarded secret room. The formation that controlled the flying ship was in this secret room. Only the leading demon monarchs were qualified to enter. Outside the secret room was a dark passage, and on both sides were tightly shut iron doors. Behind each iron door was a secret room. There were a total of 100 secret rooms, and each one was occupied by a blood god. At the end of the passage was a spacious circular hall. The hall was dimly lit with purple light, and it was used to discuss matters and issue orders. After passing through the hall to the stern of the ship, there was another straight and wide passage. There were 20 secret rooms lined up on both sides of the passage, and each room housed 50 elite demon race warriors. The flying ship had been flying for more than 20 days. Over 100 blood gods and over 1,000 demon race warriors had been cultivating in the secret rooms, conserving their strength. At this moment, in the secret room at the bow of the ship, several demon monarchs were discussing matters. A demon race man wearing a purple robe and a blood-red cloak was sitting on a throne made of white bones. Dark purple light shone on him, and half of his body and face were hidden in the shadows, making it difficult to see him clearly. The other 5 demon race experts stood around the throne, all of them wearing black armor and purple cloaks. There were men and women, old and young, and their appearances were all different. Some were like giant beasts, some were only 3 feet tall, and some were like giant infants. There were also some that looked sinister, like demon beasts. However, the strength of these 5 devils was around the 5th or 6th level of the Tribulation Transcendence realm. One of them was a tall and sturdy female demon with 2 demon horns on her forehead and a pair of black azura wings on her back. She cupped her hands towards the purple-robed man on the throne and said, "Seventh Demon Lord, The great demon saint has ordered us to escort the 100 blood gods to the battlefield. In my opinion, the great demon saint wanted to test the power of the blood god spawns through actual combat to see if their modifications were perfect. I don't recommend that you split them up. It's best to keep them together and form a special team. If this batch of blood god scions were truly perfect, their power would be limitless. This special team would also be invincible. They would tear apart the defensive line of the Luoshui Divine Nation and charge straight into the Luoshui Divine Nation. As the saying goes, pulling one part will trigger the whole situation. As long as we tear open a gap, we can gradually erode and disintegrate the entire defensive line. The Luoshui Divine Kingdom will definitely be defeated. Beside the Shura woman was a 3-foot-tall, purple-haired elder who looked like a dwarf. He waved the battle axe in his hands and said in a low voice, "Seventh Demon Lord, I don't agree with Inge's words. The goal of a unified operation is too clear and the risk is too great. If the Luoshui Divine Nation concentrates their forces and dispatches a large number of experts to besiege the blood gods, we can't afford such a heavy loss. I suggest that the blood gods' spawns be split up and led by the 10 of us demon lords. It would be safer to fight in different areas." As soon as the dwarf elder finished speaking, a 3-foot-tall giant demon with a bloody mouth waved his claws to express his objection. Other than the 6 of us who have been in power for many years, the other 4 demon lords are all newly promoted. Not only are they weaker than us, but their ability to coordinate the battle also needs to be considered. It's their first time participating in a big battle, and you want them to lead 10 blood gods each? This is too hasty. Following that, the other 2 demon lords also spoke and expressed their different opinions. The 5 demon lords were divided into 2 factions, and no one could convince the other. The purple-robed man on the throne was silent. After a long time, he said, "Let's put this matter aside for now and discuss it when we arrive at the battlefield. Moreover, the second demon saint is overseeing the battlefield, and we still need to listen to his orders." Only then did the 5 demon lords stop talking about this matter. At this moment, Inge of the Shura clan said, "Seventh demon lord, we will reach the Broken Soul Cliff in another 300 miles. Should we take a detour?" Seventh demon lord waved his hand and said in a low and indifferent tone, "No need to take a detour to avoid wasting time. Although the Broken Soul Cliff is scary, it is just a rumor that is exaggerated. Raise the flying boat to a height of 3,000 feet and fly over the Broken Soul Cliff." Inge nodded and turned to walk to the center of the secret chamber. There was a huge disc array in the middle of the secret chamber, and it flickered with dark purple light and blood mist. The disc array carried more than 10 arrays, and it was the core that controlled the flying boat. Inge walked to the center of the disc array and waved her hand, sending a few dazzling purple lights into the disc array. Suddenly, a silver light screen appeared in the air in front of them. An image appeared on the light screen. There was a dark night sky, towering mountains and peaks, and layers of dense forests. This was the scene in front of them detected by the array, and it was 100 times clearer than the naked eye. Even a drop of dew in the dense forest could be seen clearly. Inge looked at the light screen with a solemn expression, waiting for the Broken Soul Cliff to come closer. Soon, 100 breaths passed. An incomparably towering peak appeared in the image. It was majestic, mysterious, and eerie. "We are here," Inge murmured silently. Her hands formed a seal, sending a few dark purple demonic energy into the disc array under her feet. Suddenly, the flying boat began to rise under her control, rapidly increasing in height. In just 2 breaths, the flying boat rose to a height of 3,000 feet, passed through the thick clouds, and was about to fly over the Broken Soul Cliff. But at this moment, Inge suddenly saw a hazy golden light in the clouds above the Broken Soul Cliff. Although the golden light was faintly discernible in the clouds. But through the light screen in front of her, Inge could clearly see a figure in the golden light. He was about 8 feet tall, wearing a white robe, and was a human youth. Seeing this scene, Inge's pupils suddenly shrank, and a murderous intent flashed in her eyes. She never thought that there would be someone who dared to block her way on this incomparably dangerous Broken Soul Cliff. If it was any other time, she would definitely use her ultimate skill to blast that white-robed youth into pieces. But it was different now. She weighed her options and decided to ignore that white-robed youth, and controlled the flying boat to speed up. However, something even more unexpected happened. Chapter 1944. Damn it. Inge's eyes widened in anger as a strong killing intent surged in her heart. She couldn't help but curse. Reckless human reptile. I didn't want to waste time, so I spared your life. I didn't expect you to take the initiative to ask for death. Since that's the case, I'll fulfill your wish. Go to hell. At the same time, she formed a seal with both hands and manipulated the disc array under her feet to activate the array to attack. Boom. The flying boat suddenly released a dazzling bloodlight that condensed into 3 huge light pillars that blasted towards the white-robed youth. The 3 blood-colored light pillars that were hundreds of meters long cut through the dark night sky and instantly drowned the white-robed youth's figure. There was no loud explosion, nor was there a tragic scene of flesh and blood splattering everywhere. The 3 light pillars flew out hundreds of miles before dissipating in the night sky. The sea of clouds in front of the flying boat became empty. Inge's lips curled into a disdainful sneer as she muttered, "Overconfident worm, what a mantis trying to stop a chariot." However, just as her voice fell, the flying boat suddenly shook. Boom, boom, boom. In the night sky from all directions, powerful heaven and earth divine power surged and ruthlessly crushed the flying boat, making a series of dull sounds. The flying boat shook more and more violently. The outer hull of the boat was constantly caved in and cracks appeared. Even the mast and dark north flag at the bow of the boat were crushed inch by inch and scattered into pieces. The sudden upheaval made Inge full of shock. She tried her best to control the array to get the flying boat out of the predicament. The array spun at high speed as the flying boat burst out with all its power and lit up with a brilliant purple light. However, the formless energy from all directions was simply all-pervasive, so powerful that it was difficult to resist. The flying boat violently struggled for dozens of times but still couldn't get out. Several demon monarchs in the secret chamber were alarmed and came to Inge's side to ask her what happened. "Inge, what's going on? What happened? Could it be the broken soul cliff? Inge, didn't the 7 demon monarchs ask you to fly over the broken soul cliff?" Everyone anxiously questioned her. She was also at a loss as she shook her head and said, I also don't know what's going on. Earlier, I saw a white-robed young man in the sea of clouds ahead. Could it be that he's still alive?" The 7 demon lords, whose aura was the coldest and most dignified, immediately understood. They said in a sinister tone, "Prepare to meet the enemy. We have been ambushed." Following his order, the demon lords no longer hesitated. They all turned and rushed out of the secret room, leaving the flying ship. Inge was the only one left in the secret chamber. She was trying her best to control the disc array to resist the boundless suppressive force. At the same time, the blood god's clones and demon warriors were also awakened by the huge noise. Countless people opened the doors of their secret rooms and asked each other about the situation. The violent and bloodthirsty blood god scions were even more restless as they released monstrous killing intent. Inside the flying boat, it was a scene of panic. Swish, swish. After several flashes of bloody light, the 7 demon monarchs appeared in the gloomy sky with 4 demon monarchs. The 5 experts were very vigilant. They spread out and surrounded the flying boat, taking out their Dharma treasures and weapons. Everyone endured the suppression of the invisible force and released their divine senses to explore the surrounding situation, looking for the culprit. However, what puzzled everyone was that the surrounding area was empty. There was not even a shadow of a ghost. The white-robed youth that Inge mentioned was also nowhere to be seen. Could it be that Inge saw wrongly? Yes. Which human worm dares to stop us? Are they tired of living? What a powerful force. It is everywhere. It is like the power of an array. This should be the power of the Broken Soul Cliff. Legend has it that the bottom of the Broken Soul Cliff is the abyss of death. Anyone who passes by here will be swallowed. The demon lords were all filled with doubt as they secretly discussed with each other. Only the 7 demon lords remained silent and calm. He looked at the Broken Soul Cliff below and frowned as he looked around. He vaguely felt that Inge saw the white-robed youth. It was probably not an illusion. The invisible force suppressing the flying ship was probably related to the white-robed youth. If that is the case, the white-robed youth must be a powerful enemy with terrifying strength. However, why would he dare to stay at the Broken Soul Cliff? How did he know that we would fly past here and set up an ambush here in advance? Is this a coincidence, or is there a conspiracy? The 7 demon lords frowned and pondered. The more he thought, the more alarmed he felt. However, before he could think carefully, there was a sudden change behind him. Catcher! Catcher! The flying ship's defensive power reached its limit and finally could not hold on. The purple light shield collapsed on the spot. The flying ship also suddenly shattered, making a loud noise. In just 2 short breaths, the huge flying ship was crushed into pieces and crumpled into a pile of scrap metal. Countless fragments burst out and scattered from the sky. The thousands of demon race warriors hidden in the flying ship and hundreds of blood gods' illusions also flew out. The powerful divine power of heaven and earth crushed many demon race warriors on the spot. Their corpses scattered in the night sky. The demon race warriors who were lucky enough not to die also could not escape this area. They joined forces to resist the suppressive force and tenaciously held on. However, their strength was too weak. More and more people died suddenly and were crushed into powder. Only those blood gods' illusions could still resist the suppressive force. They roared wildly in the night sky and did their best to resist. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. Several rays of light flashed. Inji and the 4 demon lords flew out from the crowd and quickly met up with the 7 demon lords. The 10 demon monarchs gathered together and joined hands to cast a spell to form a light barrier that protected everyone. Everyone looked at the 7 demon lords and hurriedly asked, 7 demon lords, what do we do now? The flying ship has been destroyed. The warriors have no place to hide. Their lives are at stake. The 7 demon lords glanced at the crowd not far away. Seeing the demon race warriors dying tragically, a look of determination flashed across his eyes. We don't know the whole story yet. We must immediately take the blood god's illusions and leave Broken Soul Cliff. As for those warriors, save as many as you can. Give up on those you can't. The demon lords were silent. Their expressions were filled with grief and indignation. However, they knew that the 7 demon lords' actions were understandable. After all, the blood god's illusions were the most precious and powerful killing weapons. The demon lords made up their minds and hurriedly scattered to save the blood god's illusions. Only the 7 demon lords, Inji, and the dwarf elder were left to support the defensive light shield. The demon lords moved quickly and saved batch after batch of blood god's illusions. They brought them back to the defensive light shield. At this moment, a giant sword as black as ink suddenly flew over from the night sky. Whoosh! When it got close to the defensive light shield, the mysterious giant sword released a dazzling golden light and an unstoppable power. Kaboom! With a dull explosion, the defensive light barrier formed by the combined efforts of the demon lords shattered on the spot. Chapter 1945. The 7 demon lords, Inji, and the rest were sent flying 10,000 feet away by the violent impact. Everyone was scattered in the night sky, and they were all either lightly or heavily injured. At the same time, the formless heaven and earth divine power suddenly doubled in strength. The demon lords' bodies were distorted from the suppression, and their flying speed became extremely slow. All of them were in a predicament. As for the 100-foot-long sword of burial of heaven, it was emitting a dazzling golden light as it wantonly slaughtered the demon warriors. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. The gigantic sword slashed out a sword beam that blotted out the sky, slashing into the chaotic crowd. Bam, bam, bam. Most of the demon warriors were only at the 2nd or 3rd level of the essence soul realm. In the demon tribes or the 3 divine kingdoms, this kind of strength was indeed elite warriors. But they encountered the sword of burial of heaven, and only death awaited them, and those demon lords and blood gods could not even protect themselves, much less help them. The sword of burial of heaven went on a killing spree in the crowd. Blood splattered everywhere it passed, as though it had entered a no-man's land, sweeping everything before it. 15 minutes later, the sword of burial of heaven slaughtered more than 600 demon warriors. There were also more than 300 demon warriors that were crushed to pulp by the formless force, dying on the spot. Countless pieces of flesh and purple demon blood splattered in the night sky, emitting a thick stench of blood. And at this moment, the 10 demon lords rallied and gathered together. They led more than 100 blood gods and tried their best to flee far away from Broken Soul Cliff. Seeing this, the Sword of Burial of Heaven immediately gave chase, thrusting out sword beams to prevent the demon warriors from escaping. Ji Tianxing's cold bellow resounded in the world. Heaven and Earth Incarnation, Dragon Elephant subduing demons, Burial of Heaven, lend me a hand and send these demons to hell. Without a doubt, Ji Tianxing had already Heaven and Earth Incarnation, which was why he could maintain his formless state and support the Dragon Elephant Heavenly Seal that spanned 50 kilometers. He was the Dragon Elephant Heavenly Seal formation, and this formation was him. As he shouted coldly, he unleashed his full strength, raising the Draconic Elephant Heavenly Seal's power by 50%. It was to the extent that he didn't hesitate to absorb the spiritual energy within the Heaven-mending Pearl in order to increase the power of the Great Formation. The Burial of Heaven sword also lit up with a golden light that soared into the sky. It merged with Ji Tianxing and increased the power of the formation. Shua. The golden light merged into the world and immediately disappeared. The 10 demon monarchs and the blood gods did not dare to relax at all. Instead, their hearts were in their throats. In the next moment, the invisible divine power of heaven and earth suddenly doubled in power. A gigantic golden light shield with a radius of 100 miles suddenly appeared in the night sky. This oval-shaped light shield was filled with mysterious patterns and lines, and the shadows of ancient divine beasts appeared one after another. The 10-mile-long divine dragon shadow and the mountain-sized divine elephant shadow appeared vividly in the light barrier, exuding an aura that could suppress the heavens and the earth. Such a dazzling and magical scene was simply like a miracle. This was the Dragon Elephant Heavenly Seal secret technique that Ji Tianxing had used himself as the carrier to Kars. The 10 demon monarchs and the 100 blood gods were all enveloped by the formation. Their bodies were suppressed until they were deformed and could not move. As the golden light shield descended, the demon monarchs and the blood gods were also suppressed and fell down the Breaking Soul Cliff. Soon, the demon monarchs and the blood gods fell into the depths of the Breaking Soul Cliff and quickly approached the void net at the bottom of the cliff. The demon monarchs and the blood gods realized that something was wrong. They desperately struggled and roared. They did not know what Ji Tianxing wanted to do. But they knew that if they could not escape in time, they would definitely die. Therefore, the 10 demon monarchs rushed forward without thinking about their own safety and joined forces to cast a forbidden secret technique. Demonic Dragon Sky Explosion. The 10 demon monarchs all burned, and bloody flames emerged from their bodies, connecting to form a blood-red demonic dragon that was dozens of feet long. Everyone's power gathered and suddenly exploded, blasting toward the golden light above their heads. Kaboom! A deep crater was created in the sacred golden light barrier, and a few cracks appeared on it. Seeing this, the 10 demon monarchs were energized and attacked the golden light shield again. Kaboom! Another shattering sound was heard. The pit expanded a little, and the cracks became denser. It looked like it was about to collapse. The 100 blood gods were also encouraged. They gathered together and formed a few giant demons that were thousands of feet tall. They joined forces to attack the golden light shield. The demon monarchs and the blood gods attacked the formation with all their might, which was equivalent to attacking Ji Tianxing. Cracks and craters appeared in the formation, and Ji Tianxing also felt waves of intense pain. He was incomparably furious. Damn it! There are so many demon monarchs and blood gods. It's too difficult for me to kill them all at once. I have to think of another way. He thought angrily and anxiously, and soon he had an idea. Apocalyptic tornado. The golden light formation within a radius of 100 miles immediately spun faster, and rapidly shrank. In the blink of an eye, the golden light array turned into a huge vortex. Swish, swish, swish. The golden vortex within a 50-mile radius spun rapidly and released a dazzling golden light, illuminating the Broken Soul Cliff. A terrifying devouring power exploded from the vortex and crazily pulled the demon monarchs and blood gods. The giant demons formed by the blood gods' illusions were immediately crushed. One by one, the blood gods fell from the giant demons and involuntarily flew to the bottom of the vortex. The bottom of the golden vortex happened to be connected to the invisible void net. The first blood god was thrown out by the golden vortex and entered the invisible void net. Kai, Kai, Kai. With a faint sound, the blood god's son that was more than 10 meters tall was cut into pieces by the void net and disappeared without a trace. Then, the second blood god flew out of the golden vortex and rushed into the void net. Another Kai, Kai, Kai sounded. This blood god was also cut into pieces by the void net and then swallowed by the void net. Following that, the blood god's illusions arrived one after another, and they were all thrown into the void net by Ji Tianxing. At first, the 10 demon monarchs and the blood gods didn't know what was going on. They just desperately resisted the power of the apocalyptic tornado. But after 100 breaths, more than 60 blood gods were swallowed by the void net. The remaining blood gods and the 10 demon monarchs finally realized that something was wrong and that there was something strange at the bottom of the cliff. Everyone was filled with fear and anger. They desperately fought back, trying to destroy the golden vortex and escape the broken soul cliff. But it was futile. The golden vortex spun rapidly and unpredictably, and it could repair the cracks and gaps at any time. After 20 breaths, more than 30 surviving demon monarchs were all smashed into the void net. In the golden vortex, only 10 demon monarchs were still stubbornly resisting. Witnessing the death of 1,000 demon race warriors and the disappearance of 100 blood gods, they were in complete despair. Most importantly, they didn't even see the enemy's shadow and lost just like that. Chapter 1946. This batch of improved blood gods was the product of the ancestor Fien Celestial's hard work, and also the hope of North Underworld Mountain. They shouldered a heavy responsibility and carried an extraordinary meaning. It was the 10 demon monarchs' honor and pride to escort this batch of blood gods to the war. But now, before they could even reach the battlefield, the blood gods were all killed just as they reached the broken soul cliff. What was going on? Dying before they could even achieve victory? Who could bear this responsibility? Even if they could escape from the golden vortex and return to North Underworld Mountain, they would definitely be blasted into smithereens by the ancestor Fiend Celestial. No. The ancestor Fiend Celestial did not even need to do anything. The enraged great demon sage would kill them all to vent his anger. Thinking of this, the demon monarchs were filled with grief and despair. Everyone thought that since they were going to die anyway, they might as well fight to the death. Therefore, 3 demon monarchs burned their bodies and souls and self-detonated on the spot. Boom, boom, boom. 3 deafening explosions rang out in succession. The 3 demon monarchs all exploded, turning into bloody clouds that soared into the sky, blooming with dazzling bloody light. The power that could destroy heaven and earth was unleashed, indiscriminately sweeping across dozens of miles. Kaboom! The golden vortex could not withstand such terrifying power and was blasted into pieces. Countless shards of golden light scattered in the night sky and soon disappeared. Swoosh! The dragon elephant heavenly seal array was destroyed, and Ji Tianxing's figure appeared. His body was intact, but his internal organs and soul were severely injured. His face was as pale as paper, and blood was spurting out from his nose and mouth. Even the fluctuations of his soul had become extremely disordered, and his consciousness had become blurry and dizzy. At the same time, the other 7 demon monarchs were also enveloped by the bloody light and were sent flying in all directions. Their injuries were even worse. Their limbs were broken by the power of their companion's self-detonation, and their bodies were drenched in blood. The terrifying shockwave sent them flying in all directions, scattering in the abyss. 4 of the weaker demon monarchs were not only severely injured, but their souls and consciousness were also unconscious. The 7 demon monarchs, Inji, and the dwarf elder were stronger, and their injuries were lighter. Although they were also riddled with wounds and were in a terrible state, they were still able to maintain their consciousness. After being sent flying more than 10 miles away by the shockwave, the 3 of them stabilized themselves and tried their best to fly up the breaking soul cliff. Of course, their injuries were too severe, and they only had about 30% of their strength left. Their flying speed was also extremely slow. At the same time, a 10-meter-long pitch-black sword flew out from the night sky. It was the sword of burial of heaven. Swish! The burial of heaven shone with a resplendent golden light. Like a comet tearing through the night sky, it stabbed at the 4 demon lords at the bottom of the cliff. The 4 demon monarchs were still unconscious, drifting along with the blood-red waves of chi, bobbing up and down. Boom! Blood blossomed like a flower. The sword of burial of heaven pierced through a demon monarch and blasted it into smithereens. Even its soul was annihilated. Bang bang! The sword of the burial of heaven turned around and flew to the other side, piercing through the bodies of 2 demon lords and exploding with 2 thuds. After the sword light pierced through, the bodies of the 2 demon monarchs also exploded into countless pieces of flesh and blood, scattering in the night sky. The last demon monarch fell rapidly from the night sky, smashing into the void net at the bottom of the cliff. The sword of the burial of heaven was about to pursue, but Ji Tianxing had already woken up. He waved his hand and shot out a sword light. Boom! With another thud, the sword light pierced through the demon monarch's body. That demon monarch was cleaved in 2. Its corpse fell into the void net and was ground into smithereens. Seeing that Ji Tianxing was fine and that his injuries had already stabilized, the sword of the burial of heaven was no longer worried. Swish! It shone with a dazzling golden light, dragging a long golden tail of flame behind it as it flew up the cliff, chasing after the 7 demon monarchs and Yin Ji's group. Ji Tianxing also regained his composure and rushed up like a stream of light. After 3 breaths, the sword of the burial of heaven caught up with the 7 demon monarchs. At this time, the 3 of them had already escaped from the cliff and were above the Broken Soul Cliff. Before the 3 of them could breathe a sigh of relief, the sword of the burial of heaven attacked from behind, thrusting out a dozen giant golden swords. Swish swish swish! Suddenly, the dozen giant golden swords scattered and shrouded the 3 demon monarchs. The 3 of them did not know the secret of the sword of the burial of heaven. They thought that Ji Tianxing was controlling the sacred sword to release a sword technique to attack. Damn bastard! The North Underworld Mountain will never let you go. No matter who you are, the only outcome for going against the North Underworld Mountain is death. Even if we die here, the warriors of the North Underworld Mountain will avenge us. The 7 demon monarchs, Yin Ji, and the dwarf elder all let out roars of grief and indignation. The 3 of them used all their strength and used their trump cards to launch a counterattack. The 7 demon monarchs took out a ghastly myriad demon's banner. He cast a spell to control the myriad demon's banner to release a purple light that wrapped around his body. Yin Ji also took out a set of white bone armor that fit perfectly with her body. The dwarf elder swung his pair of battle axes with all his might and slashed at the giant golden swords. Bam bam bam! A deafening explosion resounded through the clouds. The giant golden swords shattered into pieces and scattered in the night sky. The sword of the burial of heaven's attack was neutralized by the 3 of them just like that. The 7 demon monarchs' myriad demon's banner had a few holes in it, and there were a few more bloody holes on his body. Yin Ji's white bone armor was shattered, and one of her left legs was chopped off. One of the dwarf elder's battle axes was chopped off, and the other one was full of holes. There was also a bowl-sized bloody hole in his chest. The 3 of them did not dare to continue fighting. They flew across the sky and fled towards the north. The sword of the burial of heaven did not hesitate and immediately chased after them. At this moment, Ji Tianxing also arrived at the scene. He reached out his right hand and grabbed the sword of the burial of heaven in his palm. He chased after the demon monarchs like a shooting star and stabbed with his sword. Piercing sword. A dot of cold light suddenly appeared, flashing in the night sky. In the next moment, the cold light flew across the night sky and stabbed into the dwarf elder's back before exploding. Boom! Cold light blossomed, like a huge mushroom cloud rising into the sky, illuminating the night sky within 100 miles. The dwarf elder was blown to smithereens, and his divine soul was also shattered. He died on the spot. The sword of the burial of heaven unleashed a devouring power and swallowed the fragments of the dwarf elder's divine soul. After taking care of the dwarf elder, Ji Tianxing chased after Yin Ji. Big Dipper sword. Ji Tianxing shouted and stabbed with the sword of the burial of heaven. 7 dazzling cold lights were shot out. The 7 sword lights were as dazzling as 7 shooting stars and hit Yin Ji in an instant. Bam bam bam. Yin-ji followed in the dwarf elder's footsteps. Her body and divine soul were shattered into pieces and scattered in the night sky. The seventh demon monarch was the only one left. He was still running for his life and had already fled for more than 10 miles. Ji Tianxing chased after him with a cold face. When he was still 3,000 feet away, he waved his hand and shot out a 5-colored light beam. 5-colored divine thunder. This 100-foot-long divine thunder beam was formed by 4 types of divine thunder and the silver divine fire of the stars. It was extremely powerful. Boom! A loud, dull sound exploded in the night sky. The seventh demon monarch was also smashed into pieces. Chapter 1947. The long night finally passed. After dawn, a ray of light appeared on the horizon. A new day was about to arrive. On the peak of Breaking Soul Cliff, Ji Tianxing sat cross-legged on a large millstone. His hands were crossed on his knees, and he was circulating his energy with his eyes closed, silently healing his injuries. The sword of burial of heaven floated in the sky, monitoring the movements around him, protecting him, and keeping watch. When the sun rose and scattered its warm rays, Ji Tianxing finally finished healing his injuries. His physical body was incomparably strong, and his self-healing ability had reached an abnormal level. After a few hours of recuperation, his injuries had already recovered by 70%, and he was no longer in any danger. Only the injuries to his spirit were more troublesome. Even if he took pills to heal his spirit, he would not be able to recover in a short period of time. Phew! Ji Tianxing opened his eyes and spat out a mouthful of turbid air. He was full of energy once more. Although I suffered heavy injuries from last night's battle, fortunately, I succeeded. That group of blood gods and 10 demon monarchs were all killed by me. The ancestral godfiend's scheme has been destroyed, and the pressure on the northern frontier has been greatly reduced. Ji Tianxing muttered to himself as a gratified smile appeared on his face. At this time, the sword of burial of heaven flew to his side and reminded him, "Your injuries have recovered. Shall we go down and take a look?" Ji Tianxing nodded and reached out to grab the sword of burial of heaven before flying down Breaking Soul Cliff. As he descended, he communicated with the sword of burial of heaven. "It's strange. We passed by this place many times over 1,000 years ago, and it was just an ordinary mountain range. How did it become the infamous Breaking Soul Cliff? Why did a void net appear at the bottom of the cliff?" The sword of burial of heaven was silent for a moment before replying in a low voice, "1,000 years is a short time for us, but it's a long time for ordinary people. Such a long time is enough for many things and unforeseen events to happen. The current Shenwu continent is no longer the Shenwu continent that we were familiar with. Perhaps something happened here in the past 1,000 years that caused the void cracks that are difficult to heal, and that's why the void net appeared." Ji Tianxing furrowed his eyebrows and thought for a moment. Then, he nodded and said, "That's highly likely. Only a spatial crack can release such powerful void strength." Soon, Ji Tianxing arrived at the bottom of the cliff. His figure was swallowed by the darkness. He stopped near the void net and said with a solemn expression, "If the burial of heaven was only a void net, I would be able to pass through it with my secret arts. But we don't know what lies beneath the void net, or what dangers lie beneath it." Before he could finish, burial of heaven understood what he meant. After all, the two of them were old partners with incomparable chemistry. "It's fine, I'll escort you in." Following the voice of the burial of heaven, the burial of heaven released a black light that enveloped Ji Tianxing. Shua. Ji Tianxing was swallowed into the burial of heaven and stayed in the sword's world. Then, the burial of heaven lit up with a layer of mysterious black light and flew towards the void net at a leisurely pace. Kai kai kai. As soon as the burial of heaven came into contact with the void net, it was cut by dozens of invisible void strength, emitting a series of soft sounds. Every void strength was like an unparalleled sharp knife, madly strangling the burial of heaven. However, the burial of heaven was protected by a layer of black light. The void strength cut the layer of black light into pieces, but it couldn't hurt the burial of heaven. Shua. With a flash of light, the burial of heaven drilled into the void net and disappeared into the darkness. In the next moment, the burial of heaven passed through the void net, as if crossing a layer of alternate space, and arrived in a dark space. Without the void strength cutting it, it only felt that the pressure on it was greatly reduced, and it became much more relaxed. Shua. With a flash of golden light, Ji Tianqing flew out of the burial of heaven and landed in the dark space. He held the burial of heaven in his hand and looked around vigilantly. After seeing the surroundings clearly, his body suddenly trembled, and he frowned. He saw that under his feet was a dark void. This was a vacuum zone, with nothing, no air, and no spiritual energy of heaven and earth. In front of him was a boundless starry sky, and in the depths of the distant starry sky, there were dense dots of light, flickering with a faint silver light. Those were the thousands of stars in the universe, and in the void behind him, there was an incomparably huge star that was beyond imagination. This superstar was a riot of colors. Most of the surface of the star was covered in blue, followed by green and earthy colors. However, the surface of the star was covered in a thick layer of golden light, making it impossible to see the situation on the surface of the star. Seeing this scene, Ji Tianqing fell silent, and his face was filled with memories. After a long time, he said with emotion, "Haha. In my previous life, after I reached the martial sage realm, I was able to leave the five elements world for a short time and see the magnificent starry sky. I didn't expect that in this life, I would accidentally come to the void when I was in the tribulation realm." The burial of heaven also said in a low voice, "After more than 1,000 years, I finally entered the universe's starry sky and saw the appearance of the five elements world." Without a doubt, this super huge star was the world that Ji Tianqing was in, the five elements world. 60% of the surface of the star was covered in blue. Ji Tianqing knew that it was the various oceans of the five elements world, which were boundless and vast. Those floating in the blue ocean, the yellow and green areas were continents and islands. And the mysterious golden light that enveloped the entire star was the God's seal. Only Ji Tianqing knew that because of the existence of the God's seal, the martial gods of the five elements world were unable to ascend to the upper realm. This was the biggest secret of the five elements world. Although Ji Tianqing was very far from the five elements world, at least 10 million miles away. But this distance was still too close. After all, the five elements world was too vast, with a diameter of more than 10 billion miles. Ji Tianqing could only see a corner of the five elements world and could not see the whole picture. Unless, one day, he recovered the God realm and could travel the starry sky and enter the depths of the starry sky. At that time, he would be far enough from the five elements world to be able to see the true appearance of this star. Ji Tianqing stared at the five elements star and said with a complicated tone, "Being in the five elements world, you will never know the vastness of the world and the vastness of heaven and earth." At this moment, standing in the starry sky and looking at the entire star, you will know the mystery of the five elements world. The process of martial arts cultivation is to strengthen one's own strength and to explore and understand heaven and earth. Countless martial arts geniuses and peerless powerhouses dream of leaving the five elements world and entering the void to see the magnificent starry sky with their own eyes. But from ancient times until now, among the hundreds of millions of martial arts powerhouses, how many have been able to realize their dreams? Burial of Heaven also expressed his agreement and said in a leisurely tone, "That's right. Only by reaching the God realm can one have the chance to travel the starry sky and cross the star field." Chapter 1948. Ji Tianqing sighed with emotion for a while before his complicated emotions calmed down. At this moment, he suddenly discovered that not far from the five elements world, there was a silver light flickering in the void. The silver light in the void must be the radiance of the stars. But that place is close to the five elements world, how can there be stars? Ji Tianqing frowned, revealing a look of deep confusion. The burial of heaven also sensed that something was wrong and reminded, "Just now, we passed through the void web and a spatial crack to arrive in the void. The place where the silver light shone seems to be the exit of the five elements world. It must be related to the spatial crack." Ji Tianqing nodded and said, "Let's go and take a look." With that, he entered the burial of heaven and stayed in the sword's world. The burial of heaven shone with a golden light, like a meteor streaking across the void, flying towards the silver light. Although Ji Tianqing could stay in the void, he could not maintain it for too long. If he flew for millions of miles, his magic power would not be able to sustain it, and there would be unpredictable dangers. Only the burial of heaven could travel unimpeded in the void. Although the distance between Ji Tianxing and the silver light did not seem to be far, the distance between Ji Tianxing and the silver light was not far. But the burial of heaven flew for 10 days straight and only covered a third of the distance. The distance of millions of miles was very short in the void, not worth mentioning at all. But for a martial saint, it would take a month of continuous flying to reach it. Therefore, martial saints could move in the void, but they could not travel in the void, let alone reach another star. Only martial gods had the qualifications and possibility to do so. Unknowingly, 30 days passed. The burial of heaven finally crossed the distance of millions of miles and arrived at the place where the silver light shone. This place was extremely close to the five elements world. In another few tens of thousands of miles, they would reach the golden seal. When they arrived near the silver light, the burial of heaven stopped in the void, and Ji Tianxing flew out of the sword. He focused his eyes and saw the silver light clearly. It was a great path condensed from starlight, and it was 5 kilometers wide and tens of thousands of kilometers long. One end of this mysterious starlight path was connected to the void, and the other end was connected to a gigantic black rock. The black rock was 10,000 miles long and was diamond-shaped. It was like a sharp knife that pierced through the golden light seal and stabbed into the five elements world. If one were to say that the super-huge five elements world was a big watermelon, that huge black rock was like a pebble stuck on a watermelon. After seeing this scene clearly, Ji Tianxing suddenly came to a realization and revealed a look of deep surprise. I see. No wonder there was a void net at the bottom of the broken soul cliff and a spatial crack. Who would have thought that it was this black stone that pierced through the golden light seal and pierced into the five elements world, causing the space crack that could not be healed? Burial of Heaven said solemnly, "This black stone looks very mysterious. It must have come from the depths of the starry sky and collided with the five elements world. If I'm not wrong, that is not an ordinary stone, but a meteorite formed by the shattering of a star." Ji Tianxing thought for a moment and shook his head gently. Your guess is not completely correct. The meteorite formed by the shattering of a star will burn and decompose when it passes through the void. In the end, it will fall into the five elements world. The meteorite must be very small. It is very rare for it to be the size of a house. This stone is 10,000 miles long, so it is definitely not a meteorite. It is very likely to be a star core. Star core? Burial of Heaven was stunned for a moment and said in shock, "The source and crystal of the star power?" That's right. Ji Tianxing nodded and said in a serious tone, "You should not forget that when we were fighting in the star field, I refined 18 stars and made them into a string of heavenly star chains. A star with a radius of 10 billion miles was refined to the extreme by me, and the star core was only 10,000 miles in size. I used a supreme divine art to seal the 10,000 miles long star core into a bead." Burial of Heaven responded and said in surprise, "I vaguely remember this. That is indeed the case. According to what you said, this black stone inserted in the five elements world is the star core of a great world." "It is very likely." Ji Tianxing nodded seriously and said, "Let's go and take a look." Then, he held the sword of Burial of Heaven and stepped onto the starlight ancient path, walking towards the huge black stone. The starlight ancient path had a history of thousands of years. The edges were already broken and full of cracks. After entering the starlight ancient path, Ji Tianxing felt the pressure on him decrease greatly. A vast amount of star power crazily rushed into his body and was quickly devoured and refined by him. The starlight ancient path was tens of thousands of miles long. He flew as fast as lightning, but it still took him 4 hours to reach the end of the starlight ancient path. Swoosh! After stepping onto the pitch-black star core, Ji Tianxing clearly felt that the star core contained a mysterious and invisible power. The surface of the star core was bumpy, full of cracks and craters. Ji Tianxing observed carefully and found that these were the traces of a great battle. He couldn't help but wonder which star this star core came from and which great world it was from. 1 hour later, he came to the center of the star core and saw a wide canyon in front of him. Walking to the end of the canyon, Shi Yang saw countless rocks piled up on the ground in front of him, covering a wide cave entrance. Ji Tianxing released his soul consciousness to check. After making sure that there was no aura of life in the canyon and the cave entrance, he stepped into the cave. Inside the pitch-black cave, there was a straight and wide passageway. It was obvious that it was man-made. The walls on both sides of the passage were carved with many mysterious and ancient drawings and strange alien languages. Ji Tianxing slowed down and observed the drawings and words on both sides of the passage. After walking for about 300 miles, he gradually recognized the words on the walls and understood many things. It seems that this star core is the illusory spirit world of the illusory spirit race. However, something happened to the illusory spirit star and it was destroyed by the great battle of the gods. That's why it fell in the starry sky. In the past, he had traveled across countless star fields and seen the human nature of millions of worlds. He knew very well that the billions of worlds in the universe were changing and their strength was changing every day. Every day, old worlds were destroyed, new stars were born, and new races were born. The vastness of the universe was beyond the imagination of ordinary people. The illusory spirit world was just a relatively ordinary great world among the billions of worlds. Burial of Heaven heard Shi Yang's words and was immediately interested. He asked through voice transmission, "Illusory spirit world? It sounds strange. We didn't come in contact with it back then, did we?" "Of course not." Ji Tianxing shook his head and said calmly, "From the records left in the star core, the illusory spirit world is in a very distant star field. We have never been there. What's interesting is that the illusory spirit race is one of the ancient races and a noble race with racial talents." "Oh, what do you mean?" Burial of Heaven was more and more curious. He asked through voice transmission, "Are they very powerful?" Ji Tianxing showed a playful smile and said, "No one knows if they are powerful or not." Chapter 1949. Back then, Kenshin had traversed countless galaxies and seen countless worlds and races. His knowledge was extensive, and he could draw parallels. That was why he could recognize the words and patterns of the illusory spirit race. Ji Tianxing was interested in the unfamiliar illusory spirit race. However, he knew that the illusory spirit world had been destroyed, and only a broken star core was left, which had crashed into the Five Elements world. Even if there was an illusory spirit race hidden in the star core, they must be dead now. He did not expect to meet an illusory spirit race member in the star core. He just wanted to explore the situation inside the star core. He walked along the pitch-black passageway for another 100 miles before he reached the end. In front of him was a huge stone door, which was about 100 feet tall and 100 feet wide. The stone door was dark and emitted a cold light. Its surface was engraved with strange patterns. At first glance, the densely packed patterns looked like hundreds of blooming flowers. However, Ji Tianxing stared at the stone door and observed it carefully. Soon, he found some clues. The patterns on the stone door do not depict flowers. They look more like the brains or souls of the illusory spirit race members. Those patterns should be the totem of the illusory spirit race's faith. The illusory spirit race has a powerful soul talent, so they believe that the brain and soul are the most magical power with endless possibilities. Ji Tianxing stared at the stone door with shining eyes, observing and analyzing. There are so many soul patterns engraved on this stone door. It must be an extremely well-guarded forbidden area. Burial of Heaven also agreed and said solemnly, "The star core crossed the void and flew for an unknown distance before it crashed into the Five Elements world. The star core became incomplete and suffered such a strong impact, but this stone door is still intact. It's incredible." Ji Tianxing nodded and said, "The material of this stone door is very special. I'm afraid it's not inferior to a divine weapon. Of course, it won't be damaged so easily. It seems that the stone door was originally sealed by a formation, but now the formation has been destroyed. The destruction of the world, the star core turned into a meteor and fell into the void. After suffering such a destructive impact, even a divine-level formation would not be spared, right? Let me try this stone door." Burial of Heaven flew out, shining with a dazzling golden light and emitting an unparalleled sharp aura, and stabbed at the black stone door. Ding! A crisp sound of metal clashing was heard, and dazzling silver sparks splashed on the stone door. The golden sword light was shattered into pieces, and the Heavenpiercer sword was also fiercely bounced back, flying 1,000 feet away. Seeing this, Ji Tianxing couldn't help but chuckle. I already said that the material of this stone door is comparable to a divine artifact. Why don't you believe me? Swoosh. The buried heaven sword flew back to his side and said in a low voice, "In the future, if I want to restore myself to a divine artifact, I can use this stone gate as a material." Ji Tianxing nodded and said, "No problem. I'll get it for you when the time comes." Then, he walked of heaven's world, raised of heaven. Although this stone gate is still in good condition, the formation on the stone gate has been destroyed. At least we don't have to think about how to break the formation. We just need to push this stone door open. As he spoke, dazzling golden light surged from of heaven's palms, condensing into 2 giant golden palms. He slammed them toward the stone door. Bang! The giant golden palms slammed into the stone door, creating a dull sound that reverberated in the dark passage. However, the giant golden palms were shaken to the point of exploding. The black stone door shook several dozen times, and a large cloud of dust fell, but it did not even open a crack. Seeing this, Ji Tianxing frowned and muttered, "The stone door is only 300 meters tall, but its weight is so terrifying. It's far heavier than a 10,000-meter tall mountain." Clearly, this stone door was heavier than a 10,000-meter tall mountain. It was far beyond his expectations. His strength alone was not enough to push open the stone door. He could only work with Burial of Heaven. "Burial of Heaven, lend me a hand." As he spoke, Ji Tianxing's body lit up with golden light. His body expanded rapidly, turning into a 300-meter tall giant. Burial of Heaven also lit up with golden light and flew into his body, becoming one with him. Suddenly, the 300-meter tall Ji Tianxing's strength increased by several times. His whole body exuded a heavy and majestic aura. Once again, he channeled his energy and slowly stretched out his huge palms. He pressed them against the black stone door and pushed it forward with all his strength. The black stone door immediately trembled and made a dull rumbling sound. Dust and gravel scattered everywhere. As Ji Tianxing released even more strength, the stone door shook even more violently. Crack! Something broke, and a crisp sound rang out. The stone door suddenly opened a crack and slowly opened inwards. Ji Tianxing was shocked and pushed the stone door even harder. Crack, 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 crack. With a series of crisp sounds, the stone door finally opened more than half. Only then did Ji Tianxing stop. The golden light around his body faded, and he quickly returned to his original appearance. Swoosh! In the blink of an eye, he returned to his original appearance. Holding the Burial of Heaven, he stepped through the door. The ground under the stone door was uneven and covered with fine black stones. It was these black stones that had blocked the stone door, making it difficult for Ji Tianxing to move. He passed through the wide door and entered a dark open space. It was pitch black all around. It was very spacious, and the air was filled with a cold and deathly still aura. Ji Tianxing waved his right hand and threw the Burial of Heaven out. The Burial of Heaven flew 5 kilometers away and floated in the air, shining with a dazzling golden light. The darkness within a few dozen kilometers was immediately dispelled. Ji Tianxing looked around. After seeing the scene around him, he was stunned. His face was full of shock. He saw that there was a vast open space under his feet. The grayish-brown ground was covered with dust, cracks, and gravel. It seemed to have been through the vicissitudes of time. 5 kilometers in front of him stood an ancient palace that was hundreds of feet tall and thousands of feet wide. The palace was built with black stones. Its shape was a little strange. It was an irregular oval, like a human brain. Even so, Ji Tianxing could still feel a sacred and majestic aura coming from it. There were several other palaces around this ancient palace, and their shapes were also strange. However, those palaces were slightly smaller, and their auras were weaker. Ji Tianxing counted. Including the black stone palace in the middle, there were a total of 7 palaces on this land. The arrangement and shape of each palace were different. Obviously, they had a special meaning. Although the golden light of the Burial of Heaven enveloped the 7 palaces, he could only see their general appearance. The details of each palace were hidden in the shadows and darkness. However, Ji Tianxing could still feel that the 7 palaces were the illusory spirit race's holy land, the most sacred and hidden forbidden area. The illusory spirit world had been destroyed. Chapter 1950. Ji Tianxing stood in place for a while, then stepped on the night sky and flew forward. While flying, he released his divine sense to cover a radius of 100 miles to check the surroundings. The situation was just as he had guessed. This was a cave inside the star core. This giant cave, with a radius of 70 miles, was shaped like a brain, and was naturally formed. The cave was surrounded by pitch-black rock walls, which were extremely hard and could block divine sense and dharmic powers. There was only one gap in this natural cave, and it was also the only entrance. It was the black stone gate that was 100 feet tall. After discovering this, Ji Tianxing could not help but sigh. No wonder the illusory spirit clan's belief totem is like a brain, so it's here. I guess the ancestors of the illusory spirit clan found this cave inside the star core and obtained transcendent power or treasures here. That's why the illusory spirit clan has a special soul talent and uses this as their totem. This mysterious cave must be the most sacred treasure of the illusory spirit clan, the source of their power. Ji Tianxing speculated inwardly. He had an innate excitement and anticipation towards exploring the strange culture of a foreign race. Soon, he flew near the black stone palace in the middle. Observing the palace from a close distance, he could see it more clearly. There was a square in front of the palace gate, but the ground had long been covered with gullies. Huge gravel was scattered and covered with a thick layer of dust. Some of the gullies on the ground were caused by collisions and vibrations, while some were caused by fierce battles. It was not difficult for Ji Tianxing to imagine that before the illusory spirit world was destroyed, there must have been turmoil and war in this holy land. He stepped across the broken square and landed on the steps in front of the palace gate. The black stone steps were also twisted and broken, with many gravel scattered and covered with a thick layer of dust. Ji Tianxing waved his hand and released a gust of wind, blowing up the gravel and dust on the ground. He could vaguely see some patterns and lines on the ground, as well as a few fingernail-sized metal fragments. Should be the illusory spirit clan's magical weapons? Ji Tianxing raised his eyebrows and released a soft green light, trying to pick up the dark brown fragments. However, as soon as the green light came into contact with the metal fragments, the fragments immediately weathered and turned into fine powder. Ji Tianxing was dazed for a moment. Frowning, he murmured, "No matter how broken the magical equipment is, it shouldn't be so easily eroded. Is it because it's been too long?" He walked up dozens of steps and arrived in front of the palace gate. The black stone palace gate had already been shattered into several pieces and collapsed at the entrance of the palace, covering it with a layer of dust. Most of the stone pillars under the eaves of the corridor had also collapsed. The walls of the palace were also covered with cracks. It was a scene of dilapidation and decline. Ji Tianxing stepped over the pile of rubble at the entrance and entered the spacious hall. The floor of the hall was paved with dark golden stone slabs. The stone slab was engraved with decorative patterns and diagrams. Perhaps they were also magnificent and dazzling. Unfortunately, the hall was completely pitch black while the ground was warped, cracked, and covered in dust and rocks. There were many statues in the corners of the hall, but they had long been reduced to rubble. More than half of the 16 thick pillars had also collapsed. Only a few pillars that were full of cracks were still supporting the dome of the hall, which seemed to be on the verge of collapse. There were many gemstones on the dome, and patterns were engraved on the black stone slabs. However, a few huge holes had damaged the dome, making it look like a mess. Ji Tianxing's consciousness covered the hall within a radius of 1,000 feet. Soon, he found dozens of gemstones in the rubble. Unfortunately, the strength of those originally multicolored gems had already been completely exhausted, and they had become dull and lusterless, no different from ordinary stones. Ji Tianxing stepped through the messy ruins and walked into the depths of the hall. The throne and the statue of the divine beast at the head of the hall had collapsed. There were also a few deep cracks on the wall, which seemed to be caused by the slashing of divine weapons. 15 minutes later, Ji Tianxing had explored the entire hall, but he didn't find anything useful. He passed through the secret door at the corner of the hall and entered the side hall. The side hall was smaller and also a scene of dilapidated ruins. Buried in the ruins was a secret chamber, which was where the illusory spirit clan stored their ancient books. Almost all of the ancient books were destroyed. The books made of jade slips and animal skins had been reduced to powder and no longer existed. Ji Tianxing rummaged for a while and dug out a few pages from the rubble. Those pages were made of star-true gold, which hadn't decayed for tens of thousands of years. Unfortunately, a great battle had taken place here, and a few pages of the book had been affected by the battle and were damaged. Ji Tianxing dug them out of the rubble and wiped off the dust on them. The pages reappeared with a faint golden light. After a careful examination, he found that the pages were engraved with densely packed characters in the shape of tadpoles, which looked very strange. Strange. The characters on these pages are obviously different from the illusory spirit clan's characters. Are they the original characters of the illusory spirit clan? Or are they the characters of other worlds or races? Ji Tianxing couldn't figure it out for the time being, so he put the pages into his space ring and carefully put them away. He had a hunch that the ancient books made of star-true gold and kept in the holy land of the illusory spirit clan were not ordinary things. After leaving the side hall, he went to search everywhere in the palace. Whether it was the study, the side hall, the backyard, or the garden, he searched them all carefully. Unfortunately, these places were in a complete mess, and there were dilapidated walls and ruins everywhere. He didn't find any valuable treasures. He didn't even find some fragments of magical treasures. In the end, he used his soul consciousness to search carefully and found a secret passage underground. After passing through the twisted and broken passage, which was mostly blocked by the rubble, he found a secret chamber. The secret chamber was not big, but it was very well hidden and had a strong defense. However, with the destruction of the illusory spirit world, the secret chamber was also seriously damaged. The array in the secret chamber had already dissipated. The surrounding walls were cracked, and the ground was full of rubble. Ji Tianxing walked around the secret chamber and thought that there was nothing valuable here. However, when he was about to turn around and leave, his soul consciousness suddenly detected an extremely weak soul fluctuation in the corner of the secret chamber. He stopped in his tracks and frowned in confusion. How is this possible? He couldn't believe that he could detect a soul fluctuation in such a dilapidated place. Although the soul fluctuation was extremely weak and disappeared in a flash, he was very sure that it was not an illusion. "I hope there will be a miracle," Ji Tianxing murmured in a low voice. He turned around and looked at the ruins in the corner. Then, he walked over. He waved his hand and shot out a few rays of golden light, sweeping away the rubble in the corner and clearing an open space. Chapter 1951. It was a round bracelet the size of a fist that lay quietly in the corner of the wall. On the surface, the ancient bracelet looked like it was made of brass and had a faint yellow color. The ancient bracelet was covered in a layer of dust and its surface was filled with scratches. There were even a few obvious gaps. Clearly, this ancient bracelet was also affected by the battle and was damaged. Ji Tianxing used his spirit consciousness to investigate and discovered that the ancient bracelet did not have the aura of a Dharma treasure or the energy fluctuation of a divine weapon. No matter how he looked at it, it was a very ordinary bracelet. It was like an accessory worn by mortals and could not even be considered as a dharmic weapon. However, such an ancient bronze bracelet had survived until now in the ruins where everything was destroyed. Ji Tianxing was certain that this mysterious ancient bronze bracelet was definitely not an ordinary item. It was just that he could not see through the mysteries of the ancient bronze bracelet at the moment. What's more, that weak soul fluctuation came from the ancient bronze bracelet. This made him suspect that there might be a powerful spirit hidden within the ancient bronze bracelet. Therefore, he waved his hand and released a gentle green light that enveloped the ancient bronze bracelet. Thankfully, the ancient bronze bracelet was not weathered and was still intact. Ji Tianxing picked up the ancient bronze bracelet and observed it carefully in his palm. The outer ring of the ancient bronze bracelet was extremely rough and filled with scratches and gaps. However, the inner ring of the ancient bronze bracelet was smooth and there was a string of ancient words carved on it. Ji Tianxing took a closer look and realized that it was a few words of the illusory spirit race. Ancient God. Miji. Star-fixing ring. Ji Tianxing muttered softly and frowned in confusion. Ancient God. Miji. Star-fixing ring. Could this really be a divine weapon? But why don't I have the aura of a divine weapon? He was still puzzled. What did these words mean? Was it the star-fixing ring of the ancient god Mi? Or was it the star-fixing ring of the ancient god Miji? More importantly, he was the one who identified and deduced the 7 words of the illusory spirit race and might not be correct. Just as he was pondering, another soul fluctuation flashed through the ancient bronze bracelet. This time, Ji Tianxing held the ancient bronze bracelet with his own hands and truly felt its power. That weak soul fluctuation was real. There was nothing fake about it. His train of thought was interrupted as he stared at the bronze bracelet with a burning gaze. To be able to enter the most secluded secret room in the Phantom Spirit Holy Land, and to have a strand of his divine soul remaining until now, the divine soul in this bracelet has to be at least a martial god expert, right? Thinking of this, he sent a message to the Burial of Heaven through divine telekinesis. Soon, the Sword of Burial of Heaven passed through the dark passage and arrived at the secret chamber. Shua. The Sword of Burial of Heaven stopped beside him and lit up with a brilliant golden light, illuminating the entire secret room. Seeing the bronze bracelet in his hand, Burial of Heaven asked, "What kind of treasure is this?" "Divine artifact." Ji Tianxing nodded and said calmly, "It should be. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been preserved until now. There are soul fluctuations in this bracelet. It's very likely that the divine soul of a martial god is hiding inside." The Sword of Burial of Heaven immediately understood what he meant and said in a low voice, "It's fine. Even if it's the soul of a martial god, it might not be able to survive after the destruction of the world. Even if it has the protection of a divine artifact and barely survived, it must be very weak." Ji Tianxing didn't say anything else. Holding the bronze bracelet in his left hand, he released his divine sense with his right hand and slowly injected it into the bronze bracelet. Originally, he was worried that the bronze bracelet was still protected by divine power and that his divine sense couldn't penetrate it. But it turned out that he worried too much. His divine sense wasn't obstructed and smoothly entered the bronze bracelet. Of course, there was also a Dharma treasure space inside the bronze bracelet. But it wasn't the kind of world in the Sword of Burial of Heaven. Instead, it was a vast and empty dark space. What made Ji Tianxing even more surprised was that there were many milky white balls of light floating in that boundless dark space. They were like fireflies. His divine sense passed through the darkness and came into contact with those white balls of light. Only then did he realize that they were balls of divine souls. There were a total of 19 balls of light. They were the divine souls of 19 expert. Among them, 18 of them were only the size of walnuts. There was only one divine soul that was the size of a fist. The soul fluctuation that Ji Tianxing had sensed earlier was the largest divine soul. This scene filled his heart with shock. He exclaimed in disbelief, "I didn't expect that there was more than one divine soul hidden in the bracelet. There are actually 19 of them. The strongest divine soul must be the martial god's soul. The other 18 divine souls should be the martial saint's soul." Hearing his voice, the Sword of Burial of Heaven asked worriedly, "One martial god's soul and 18 martial saint's souls? Do they still have consciousness? Will they counterattack and attack you?" Ji Tianxing hurriedly comforted him, "Don't worry. The consciousness of these divine souls has long dissipated and they are extremely weak. They have become the purest form of divine soul power, wandering around aimlessly. They are no threat at all." The Sword of Burial of Heaven heaved a sigh of relief and said excitedly, "The purest form of divine soul power? Wouldn't that be a great supplement for me?" Ji Tianxing frowned and said unhappily, "What I was thinking was whether I could solve the mystery of the destruction of the illusory spirit world through these divine souls and obtain the inheritance and secret techniques of the illusory spirit clan. But you only want to devour divine souls to recover your own strength." The Sword of Burial of Heaven retorted without hesitation, "The consciousness of those divine souls has dissipated. They can no longer be regarded as intelligent life. They are just balls of pure energy. Even if I devour them to recover my strength, it doesn't violate any moral principles, does it? Besides, you are the divine king who rules over 10,000 god. What kind of divine arts and secret techniques have you not seen before? How can you be interested in the inheritance and secret techniques of the illusory spirit clan? Ji Tianxing thought for a moment, then nodded and said, fine. The illusory spirit world is the same as the five elements world. It is just an inferior world ruled by the martial god. Since those divine souls have become pure energy, I don't want to waste my energy to investigate any secrets. I will give them to you to devour. The sword of burial of heaven thought for a moment, then reminded him, 1 martial god's soul and 18 martial saints' souls. I definitely won't be able to devour them all. It just so happens that the white dragon's remnant soul hasn't recovered yet. It needs to replenish its divine soul power the most. You can consider it first. Of course I have thought of that. I definitely won't let you take all the benefits. Ji Tianxing showed a smile. Then, he cast a spell and took out 2 martial saints' souls from the ancient bronze bracelet, and handed them to the sword of burial of heaven. The sword of burial of heaven emitted a black light and devoured the 2 walnut-sized divine souls. Then, the sword of burial of heaven entered a dormant state, impatiently refining the divine soul power. Ji Tianxing put away the ancient bronze bracelet, then turned and left the secret room. He flew out of the black stone palace and flew to a palace on the side. That palace was the same as the black stone palace. It had been severely damaged both inside and out. It was a mess everywhere. Ji Tianxing spent 2 hours searching the entire palace, but he didn't find any useful treasures. Chapter 1952. In the next 20 hours, Ji Tianxing searched the 6 palaces one by one. These 6 smaller palaces were all in a mess. There were dilapidated walls everywhere in the palaces, and the ground and walls were all twisted and broken. Obviously, they had suffered a great impact. Ji Tianxing searched all 6 palaces, but he did not find any magic treasures or weapons. He only found some remaining armor fragments and 2 jade slips that were about to be eroded. The broken armor fragments were once a divine artifact, but unfortunately, they were now useless. As for the 2 cracked jade slips, they used to record a lot of information in the language of the illusory spirit clan. But now, there was not much information left in the jade slips, and only a few words were left. Ji Tianxing spent half a day carefully studying and identifying those words before he could barely understand the meaning. He guessed that the information recorded in the 2 jade slips was related to the sacrificial ceremony held by the illusory spirit clan. I found these 2 jade slips in the secret chamber of the 3rd palace in the west. In addition to these 2 jade slips, there were many ancient books and books stored in it, but they have long been turned into ashes. It seems that the palace should be the gathering place of the ceremonial officials, and the ancient books stored in the secret chamber were also records of the rituals of the illusory spirit world. Thinking of this, Ji Tianxing put the 2 jade slips into the space ring and kept them. He sighed regretfully and murmured, "A world that was once incomparably prosperous and glorious is gone just like that, leaving behind only a few remnants. Unfortunately, there are too few clues left. Otherwise, I might have figured out the truth of the destruction of the illusory spirit world." After sighing for a while, he flew across the dark night sky toward the exit of the Holy Land. When he arrived at the Black Stone Gate, he looked back at the dark space behind him, and then turned to leave. Of course, after leaving the Holy Land, he did not forget to close the Black Stone Gate. Creak, creak, creak. With a dull sound, the Black Stone Gate slowly closed. Ji Tianxing turned around and was about to leave the illusory spirit clan's Holy Land. However, when he turned around, he saw that there was a ball of dark red flames in the pitch-black tunnel. That ball of dark red fire was about 3,000 meters away from him. The blood-red flames blazed fiercely, illuminating the surroundings. Ji Tianxing took a closer look and realized that it wasn't a flame. It was a blood god's sun formed from a ball of bloody light. The blood god's illusions were 30 meters tall, and their bodies were bloated and constantly changing. Sometimes they were like giant apes, sometimes they were like violent bears, and sometimes they were like ghosts and trolls. Ji Tianxing frowned and used his divine sense to sense the blood god's sun. Only then did he realize that the blood god's son's aura was very mixed. There were actually more than 30 different auras intertwined and merged together. That feeling was like pulling out the souls of dozens of people and twisting them together like twisting hemp rope. Although it was chaotic, the power gathered together was extremely powerful. Ji Tianxing could vaguely sense that the blood god's son's strength was between half-step to Saint Realm and martial sage realm. After all, it was still fusing and assimilating those complicated auras. Every time it fused with a chaotic aura, its strength would increase. Ji Tianxing had no doubt that if the blood god's son could fuse with all the auras, it would definitely reach martial sage realm. He immediately frowned and stared coldly at the blood god's son. He muttered to himself, "Damn it. Why would the blood god's son appear on this star core? Could it be that after the hundreds of blood god's sons were killed by the voidnet, they left behind a large amount of remains and gathered together to form this blood god's son? This mutated blood god's son is actually the combination of hundreds of blood god's sons?" He thought about it and felt that this was the closest answer to the truth. No wonder the aura of this blood god's son is so chaotic and powerful. I didn't expect the blood god's son that was modified by the ancestor demon god to have such a strong vitality. It could survive after being killed by the void net. They could even fuse together and become even more powerful blood god's sons. I have underestimated them. At this thought, Ji Tianxing felt extremely fortunate. Fortunately, he had intercepted the batch of blood god's sons and killed them at the Breaking Soul Cliff. If the batch of blood god's sons had reached the north border battlefield, they would have been invincible and there would have been a bloodbath. Roar, roar. Just as Ji Tianxing was rejoicing, the blood god's son let out a low roar and its ferocious form closed in on him. It burst out with dazzling flames and passed through the passageway at lightning speed. It pounced on Ji Tianxing. Swoosh swoosh swoosh. When it was 1,000 feet away from Ji Tianxing, it turned into a huge demon and waved its four thick arms. More than 10 rays of bloodlight shot out. Every ray of bloodlight was 100 feet long and they were like 10 sharp giant swords. They covered Ji Tianxing's body. These giant swords could not only destroy his physical body, but they could also severely injure his spiritual soul. Ji Tianxing did not dare to be careless. He quickly held the Burial of Heaven sword and slashed out more than 10 rays of dazzling sword radiance. Breaking Sun sword. With a wave of the Burial of Heaven sword, 16 golden giant swords burst out with violent power and slashed toward the bloodlight. This was the 7th sword of the Burial of Heaven 9 swords. Its moves were mysterious and powerful. Bang, 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 bang. The golden sword radiance collided with the bloodlight and a series of muffled sounds echoed in the passageway. The sword radiance and the bloodlight collapsed at the same time, turning into dense light fragments that splashed in all directions and hit the black rock wall. The ground and rock wall of the passageway were abnormally sturdy. The light fragments hit the rock wall and only left shallow marks. Ji Tianxing and the blood god's son exchanged blows and did not have the upper hand. The coldness in his eyes became more intense. He did not retreat at all. He took the initiative to charge at the blood god's son and raised his left palm. 5-colored divine thunder. As he shouted coldly, a 5-colored brilliance surged out of his palm and turned into a beam of light that blasted toward the blood god's son. The beam of light contained heavenly thunders of 4 elements and the silver star divine fire. Its power was unpredictable. The blood god's son was a bit clumsy. It instinctively wanted to dodge, but it couldn't. Boom! A muffled sound burst out, shaking 1,000 feet radius and stirring up the gravel and dust on the ground. The blood god's son was hit in the chest by the 5-colored divine thunder. It immediately let out a cry and flew back. It was blasted 10 miles away before it crashed into the corner of the passageway, shaking off the rocks on the rock wall. When it rolled to the ground, one could see clearly that there was a washbasin-sized wound on its chest and abdomen. Thunderbolts were still attached to the wounds, flickering and crackling. The blood god hurriedly got up and roared in pain. Its body surged with bloodlight. After a while, its body became a 100-meter blood dragon. Chapter 1953. Ji Tianxing knew the blood god's son very well. The blood god's son's characteristics were changeable and could not be injured. No matter how badly the blood god's son was injured, even if it was cut into pieces, it could reform and recover. Of course, every time the blood god's son was injured, its power would gradually weaken. Luckily, it's only equivalent to a half-saint now. I can still deal with it. If it reaches the saint realm, it will be troublesome. This thought flashed through Ji Tianxing's mind as he swung his sword again. Heaven-cleaving sword. In the blink of an eye, he rushed in front of the blood dragon and slashed down with the sword of burial of heaven. However, he did not use magic power, but the power of the heaven patching pearl. The sword of burial of heaven lit up with a holy white light and condensed into a huge white light sword that was 30 meters long. It emitted a mysterious aura. The blood dragon's ferocity was aroused as it roared furiously. As it dodged, it raised its huge front claws and slapped at Ji Tianxing. Bang! Bang! Two loud, muffled sounds exploded almost at the same time, causing the tunnel to shake incessantly. The blood dragon could not dodge the attack of the sword of divine light. Its tail was cut off and it screamed as it flew backward. The severed tail was enveloped by the holy white light and quickly melted away. However, its huge front claws also hit Ji Tianxing. Ji Tianxing flew backward for 5 kilometers and crashed into the pitch-black rock wall with a plop. His face was pale as blood flowed from the corner of his mouth. His chest had sunk in by an inch. Fortunately, his body had been tempered and was comparable to a half-martial saint. If not, the blood dragon's violent claw would have turned him into minced meat. Phut! Ji Tianxing spat out a mouthful of dirty blood. He used his power to suppress the injuries in his internal organs and quickly recovered his chest. He held the sword of burial of heaven with both hands and charged at the blood god again to attack. Heaven-cleaving sword. The sword of burial of heaven burst forth with holy white light again, condensing into a giant sword that was 1,000 feet long, slashing toward the crimson dragon. The passageway wasn't very big. It was only about 3,000 meters in radius. For an expert who was half a step away from the saint realm, this little bit of space wasn't enough. It was very difficult for him to dodge and teleport. The blood dragon could only retreat with all its might, but it was still unable to dodge. Boom! The 1,000-meter-long holy light sword struck the blood dragon's head. Its huge body was split into 2 halves by the giant sword on the spot and was sent flying to both sides. The 2 halves of his body hit the rock wall and rolled to the ground. A layer of hazy white light enveloped the 2 halves of its body, quickly devouring and purifying the blood light. The blood dragon's body struggled violently, and it let out waves of miserable howls. Ji Tianxing hurriedly chased after it, and was about to use his palm to release the divine white light to purify it. However, the blood dragon was very decisive. It directly abandoned 1/3 of its body and allowed the white light to purify it. The remaining 2/3 of its body immediately escaped the white light's envelopment and gathered together, turning into a giant crimson bird that was 30 feet long. The ferocious crimson bird had a thin body, and its wings were exceptionally wide. It quickly flapped its wings, turned into a crimson stream of light, and turned to fly out. Whoosh! In the blink of an eye, it flew dozens of miles away and disappeared around the corner of the passageway. Ji Tianxing was stunned for a moment, and a contemptuous sneer appeared on his face. "You still want to escape now?" Wishful thinking. As he spoke, he sped up on his sword, turned into a stream of light, and chased after it. After chasing for about 200 miles, he caught up with the crimson bird and launched another attack. Piercing sword. The sword of burial of heaven burst forth with dazzling white light, flashing in the darkness. The next moment, the divine white light pierced the crimson bird's back and exploded inside its body. Boom! A ball of divine white light exploded, like a mushroom cloud rising into the air, filling the 10-mile passageway. The crimson bird exploded into thousands of pieces of crimson light on the spot, scattering in the passageway. Most of the pieces of crimson light were purified by the white light. A moment later, the remaining pieces of crimson light gathered together, turning into a 30-foot-long crimson sword. However, the blood god's son had been severely injured, and more than half of it had been devoured by the heaven-mending orb. Its power was rapidly weakened, and it only had 40% of its strength left. Seeing Ji Tianxing chasing after it, it had no intention to fight and desperately escaped. Ji Tianxing did not show any mercy and chased after it. 7-star sword. Broken moon sword. Heavenly dragon palm. He kept using all kinds of secret techniques, and the blood god's son could not fight back at all. The two chased for a few hundred miles and exchanged more than 10 moves. About 15 minutes later, the blood god's son finally escaped from the black stone passageway and returned to the canyon outside. At this moment, it had turned into a 30-foot-tall giant beast, and was rushing to the other end of the canyon with all its might. The canyon was very wide, and there were not many obstacles. It was suitable for powerhouses to fight. However, its power was extremely weak, and it was already at the end of its tether. It had just flown 25 miles when a blazing white sword light attacked from behind. Boom! With a muffled sound, it was hit by the sword light and shattered into more than 10 pieces. The pieces of crimson light fell from the sky and scattered into the canyon. Before the pieces could gather again, Ji Tianxing shot out an overwhelming white light, enveloping all the pieces. This time, the blood god's son could not escape. In just 10 breaths, all the pieces of crimson light were purified by the white light and turned into pure energy, which was devoured by the heaven-mending orb. The battle finally ended. Only then did Ji Tianxing let out a sigh of relief. He put away the Heavenpiercer sword with a tired look on his face. Then, he quickly took out a medicinal pill and swallowed it. In the void, he could neither breathe nor absorb the spirit qi of heaven and earth. Fighting in the void consumed far more magic power than usual. In order to kill this mutated blood god's son, he had almost used up all his magic power and was already exhausted. However, it was worth it to completely kill the blood god's son that was modified by the ancestor demon god. Moreover, the heaven-mending orb had devoured the mutated blood god's son and gained a lot of power, increasing its power. After taking the pill, Ji Tianxing found a secluded place to recuperate. It took him 3 whole days to completely recover his magic power. His injuries had also stabilized, and he was no longer in danger. After healing, he left the canyon and went back the way he came. Half a day later, he passed through the starry ancient path and returned to the dark and cold void. Standing in the void, he looked at the huge star core in front of him and muttered to himself, "If this remnant star core is refined and modified, it can be compared to a divine artifact. It's a pity that I'm not powerful enough now. I can't absorb this star core, let alone refine it. When I return to the martial god realm, I'll refine this star core and help the burial of heaven to refine the blade and restore it to a divine artifact. Or, I can give it a try when I reach the martial sage realm." Chapter 1954. Ever since Ji Tianxing had entered the void, he had been delayed for more than 30 days. There were no treasures or clues on the star core that were worth his time. Thus, he stepped into the void and flew toward the golden seal in front of him. That layer of golden light seal from the gods enveloped the entire 5 elements world. The illusory star core was like a sharp shuttle inserted into the 5 elements world, piercing a massive fissure in the golden seal. Ji Tianxing had come out from this fissure, and now he was going back the way he came. He entered the world within the sword and used his divine sense to control the sword of burial of heaven, speeding through the void. The sword of burial of heaven glowed with a golden light, like a thin bolt of lightning tearing through the void. Several hours later, the sword of burial of heaven flew into the golden seal and arrived near the pitch-black fissure. Whoosh! With a flash of light, the sword of burial of heaven entered the spatial fissure and disappeared into the darkness. The next moment, the sword of burial of heaven passed through a layer of shattered and distorted space and returned to the 5 elements world. A dazzling golden light lit up in the darkness at the bottom of Breaking Soul Cliff, exuding a powerful and dignified qi. Soon after, Ji Tianxing flew out of the sword of burial of heaven. He stood at the bottom of the pitch-black cliff, gripping the sword of burial of heaven. Taking a deep breath, he flew up the cliff. During his 30-some days in the void, he had not even breathed in a single breath of air, nor had he absorbed any of the world's spiritual energy. Now that he could breathe in the world's spiritual energy once more, he felt his entire body relax, as if all his pores had opened up. Soon, he returned to the sky above Breaking Soul Cliff. It was evening, and the orange setting sun was on the verge of disappearing into the horizon. The Breaking Soul Cliff was somewhat dusky, and cold winds constantly blew. Ji Tianxing looked around and saw that it was quiet, so he released his divine sense. When his divine sense spread out 100 li and enveloped the entire mountain, he quickly discovered some clues. Many messy marks had been left behind on the side and summit of the mountain. After careful observation, he discovered that most of the marks were left behind when he fought with the demon monarchs and the blood gods more than a month ago. However, a few of the marks were not left behind by the battle, but more like left behind when someone searched the mountain. This discovery made Ji Tianxing frown, a hint of suspicion flashing in his eyes. But after thinking for a moment, he guessed the reason. It's most likely that the demon race came here to search, which is why they left these traces. After all, the 10 demon monarchs, hundreds of blood gods, and thousands of demon warriors should have arrived at the northern border battlefield. After I fought with the demon race army, I left many traces near the Broken Soul Cliff. Not only were there the corpses of demon warriors, the fragments of the demon lord's treasures, and the wreckage of the flying ship. As long as demon powers find here, they would definitely find those traces and judge that something happened to blood god and demon monarchs. Although, this was not good. However, Ji Tianxing didn't care. He even took pleasure in the misfortune of others. The ancestral fiend god spent half a year to improve the perfect blood god's son, but it was destroyed before it even reached the battlefield. I wonder how it will feel when it learns of this news. After a while, Ji Tianxing collected his thoughts and flew into the sky, rushing back to Pillar of Heaven's mountains. Time flew by, and 20 days passed in a flash. That night, when the moon was bright and the stars were few, Ji Tianxing returned to Pillar of Heaven's mountains. Under the night sky, Pillar of Heaven's mountains stood quietly in the depths of the mountains, like a black pillar supporting the sky. Ji Tianxing was not in a hurry to return to the mountain peak. He stood in the night sky and observed the situation. He saw that in the valley at the foot of Pillar of Heaven's mountains, rivers had already appeared at the foot of the surrounding mountains. Although the rivers were not big, only a few 100 feet wide. But the rushing river reflected the bright moonlight, and the sparkling ripples were also beautiful. The towering Pillar of Heaven's mountains was also enveloped by a layer of faint 5-colored spiritual light, appearing to be full of spiritual energy. On the mountain walls and cliffs, lush spiritual herbs and spiritual trees grew. It was a thriving state. In the cliffs above the clouds, there was a 5-colored waterfall, continuously sprinkling 5-colored spiritual liquid. Such a magnificent scene, even if one saw it at night, was intoxicating. Ji Tianxing revealed a gratified smile and whispered to himself, "I've been away for more than 2 months, and there are finally changes in Pillar of Heaven's mountains. Now, it looks like what a martial arts holy land should look like." Although the current appearance of Pillar of Heaven's mountains was quite different from the Holy Land in the past. But this was a very good start. Ji Tianxing believed that at most, in another 10 years, the Pillar of Heaven's mountains would be able to return to its former glory. He passed through the thick clouds and returned to the peak of Pillar of Heaven's mountains. The bright moonlight shone on the peak of the mountain and spread over the 100-mile dojo. The dojo was like a mirror, reflecting the silver-white moonlight, illuminating the surrounding palaces and mansions. There were a few teams of patrolling guards, all wearing armor and holding swords, carrying out their tasks meticulously. The various palaces and mansions on the peak of the mountain were also peaceful and quiet, with little lights lit up. Ji Tianxing looked around and saw that during the time he was away, nothing had happened to Pillar of Heaven's mountains. He was quite satisfied and quietly flew across the dojo and returned to Pillar of Heaven's palace. After entering the secret chamber, he opened a secret passage in the corner of the secret chamber and entered the Star Divine Furnace underground. After more than 2 months, when he entered the Star Divine Furnace, he found that the entire Star Divine Furnace was filled with a sea of fire. The surging Star Divine Fire was like a silver lake, surging and stirring up waves. The star torch in the middle of the Divine Furnace had long been submerged in the sea of fire. The violent star divine power tightly wrapped around him and constantly poured into his body. He silently operated the star body refining art, imperceptibly absorbing the star divine power. The 3 corners of the Star Divine Furnace were occupied by Black Dragon, Qian Yu, and White Dragon. He first went to check on Black Dragon and Qian Yu. Black Dragon and Qian Yu were still cultivating in seclusion, using the star divine fire to temper their bodies. What surprised him was that Black Dragon and Qian Yu had both passed the heavenly tribulation and reached the second layer of the tribulation passing realm. Of course, Qian Yu was the first to pass the tribulation. Its strength was a bit stronger and was not far from the third layer of the tribulation passing realm. Little Black Dragon was the last to pass the tribulation, but its strength foundation was more stable and its magic power was more vigorous. Seeing that Black Dragon and Qian Yu were fine, Ji Tianxing was relieved. He flew to another corner of the Star Divine Furnace to check on White Dragon. The Great Formation was intact, and the glazed treasure bottle was also fine. However, the longevity vine in the bottle was obviously shorter by half. White Dragon's remnant soul had also grown a bit stronger and had formed a fist-sized cyclone. Seeing this scene, Ji Tianxing was quite gratified. He took out the copper bracelet called the Ancient God Star Fixing Ring from the interspatial ring. He took out a walnut-sized Martial Saint's soul from the copper bracelet and threw it into the glazed treasure bottle. The Martial Saint's soul had no consciousness and was just a pure divine power. It would not harm White Dragon's remnant soul at all. White Dragon's remnant soul first circled around the Martial Saint's soul a few times. Chapter 1955. The White Dragon's remnant soul was in a very complicated state. The remnant soul was very strong and tenacious. It was even stronger than the Martial Saint's soul. Even after a few hundred years, the remnant soul would not dissipate if it could not replenish its power. It could still be preserved perfectly. But it was very weak. After all, it did not have a clear consciousness and only had a vague instinct. If no one helped it, it would not be able to devour soul power to repair itself. Even if Ji Tianxing helped it by setting up the array and using the glazed treasure bottle and the longevity vine, the speed at which it devoured soul power was still too slow. After an entire day, it had only devoured less than 10% of the Martial Saint's soul power. Moreover, it had to stop and sleep to slowly digest the soul power. Ji Tianxing was anxious, but there was nothing he could do. He had tried his best. The only thing he could do now was to wait. He hoped that the White Dragon's remnant soul could refine the Martial Saint's soul as soon as possible and regain its consciousness. He understood that the White Dragon's remnant soul was too weak. Now was the initial stage of recovering its power. It was equivalent to laying the foundation. Of course, the speed was the slowest. When the White Dragon's remnant soul regained its consciousness, the speed of recovery would double. Ji Tianxing took out a Martial Saint's soul from the ancient bronze bracelet and placed it in the glazed treasure bottle. Then, he left the Star Divine Furnace. When he returned to the secret chamber, it was already the morning of the third day. He summoned Ji Bai and ordered him to summon the Huanglong Daoist. After a quarter of an hour, the Huanglong Daoist hurried over. The Huanglong Daoist entered the secret chamber and saw Ji Tianxing sitting on the throne with his eyes closed. He quickly bowed respectfully. Disciple Huanglong greets Master. Master, you have been gone for a few months. You have finally returned safely. Ji Tianxing opened his eyes and looked at him. He asked calmly, "What's wrong?" During this time, what happened in the Pillar of Heaven's mountains? The Huanglong Daoist quickly shook his head and explained, "The Pillar of Heaven's mountains is safe and sound. There were no accidents. It's just that you acted alone to kill the demon army and the blood god. It's been more than 2 months, and there's still no news from you. The disciples and elders are all very worried." Ji Tianxing waved his hand and comforted him. "There was a small incident when I was trying to kill the blood god's son at the Broken Soul Cliff, and it did take a lot of time. However, I've wiped out the demon army and the blood god, so there's nothing to worry about." Huanglong Daoist was relieved and said excitedly, 10 demonic monarchs and hundreds of blood gods. Master actually killed them all? This was simply inconceivable. Master, you have not recovered to the martial sage realm and you already have such shocking skills. When you return to the martial sage realm, won't it be the end of the North Underworld Mountain? It's not that exaggerated. Ji Tianxing shook his head and asked in a dignified tone, "How is the situation of the Pillar of Heaven's mountains and the 9 sects and 18 schools in the past few months?" Huanglong Daoist reported, "Master, the 9 sects and 18 schools have pledged their allegiance and joined forces to set up a defense circle to protect the safety of the Pillar of Heaven's mountains. They will listen to our orders at any time. The hundreds of cities and hundreds of millions of people have also pledged their allegiance and did not dare to have any disloyalty. In the past 3 months, the martial artists of the 9 sects and 18 schools and the various cities have captured and killed dozens of demon clan members. Although those demon clan members were ordinary soldiers and there were only a few cross-calamity realm martial artists. However, I've already followed your rules and rewarded those people according to their merit. The prestige of the Pillar of Heaven's mountains is growing and it's deeply rooted in people's hearts. I estimate that in at most 10 years, the Pillar of Heaven's mountains will be able to restore its prestige and power. After he finished talking about the 9 sects and 18 schools, he reported the situation of the Pillar of Heaven's mountains. Ever since Master ordered us to double the amount of cultivation resources, the disciples have been working hard and cultivating with all their might. In the past 6 months, the strength of the disciples has increased significantly. Especially the deacons. There are 3 new cross-calamity realm martial artists. Disciple plans to wait until autumn next year to select an elder from those 3 people. Huanglong Daoist described the situation of the Pillar of Heaven's mountains in detail, his tone full of expectation. Ji Tianxing listened carefully, nodding and shaking his head from time to time, giving corresponding opinions. In the blink of an eye, an hour passed. Huanglong Daoist finished his report and was about to leave. Ji Tianxing warned, Huanglong, although the situation is getting better and better, you can't relax. You still have to keep an eye on the 9 sects and 18 schools. In addition, you can't relax the guidance of the disciples. If you have time, you can personally guide those trustworthy and moldable deacons and disciples. Recently, my power has increased by several times. I'm preparing to go into seclusion for half a month to welcome the next heavenly tribulation. Huanglong Daoist bowed and said, I understand. Please rest assured, Master. After he finished speaking, he bowed and left the secret room. After Huanglong Daoist left, Ji Tianxing prepared to go into seclusion to cultivate and break through to the 5th stage of the cross-calamity realm. However, before he went into seclusion, he first sent a communication jade slip to Jiku. He had given this matter a lot of thought. Last time, Jiku sent him a message to tell him about the blood god's son. At that time, Jiku's situation was critical and she was seriously injured. Ji Tianxing was worried about her safety, but he didn't dare to rashly send a message, lest her identity be exposed. Now, more than 2 months had passed. In his opinion, Jiku's situation should be safe. He took out a black communication jade slip and used his divine sense to input his thoughts into the jade slip. Whoosh! With a flash of light, the communication jade slip flew out of the secret room and immediately disappeared into the sky. The black jade slip is specially made. On the surface, it looks very similar to the communication jade slip of the devil race. It shouldn't cause Ku any trouble. This thought flashed through Ji Tianxing's mind as he waited patiently. After a full hour, a dark purple light flew into the secret room. Whoosh! The purple light fell into his palm. It was a devil race's jade slip. He held the jade slip in his hand and probed it with his divine sense. Immediately, a wave of information poured into his mind. Jiku's clear and calm voice sounded in his mind. Big brother Tianxing, the previous injury was an accident. However, I have already taken care of it. You don't have to worry. For the past 3 months, I have stayed in the Devil Palace in the North Underworld Mountain and didn't go out to perform any missions. I have gradually gained the trust of the Great Devil Saint and the generals, and I have also inquired about a lot of information. The group of Devil Monarchs and Blood God's sons still haven't arrived at the North Border battlefield, which aroused the Great Devil Saint's suspicion. The Great Devil Saint sent people to investigate and found the corpses of the Devil race near the Broken Soul Cliff, as well as the wreckage of the flying boat. All the Devil race had disappeared without a trace. When the news reached the North Underworld Mountain, I guessed that it was you. I was very happy and excited. The ancestor Devil God was furious, and the Great Devil Saint was also furious. He sent a large group of experts to investigate this matter and find the culprit. In addition, There was also a very secret news. A human expert found a grotto heaven's secret realm in the ruins of God. Chapter 1956. When Ji Tianxing heard this, he was already tempted. He had heard of the yin-yang sages 1,000 years ago. More than 2,000 years ago, Shunwu continent had been embroiled in chaos, and various races had fought each other. Although the three divine kingdoms had been established, the overall situation of Shunwu continent had been relatively stable. However, there had been constant small-scale disputes. This was especially true for the regions outside of the three divine kingdoms' territories, which had become even more chaotic. In this chaotic era, the powerhouses of dozens of races had declared themselves kings and attacked each other, seizing territories and resources. The three divine kingdoms could not interfere, so they could only suppress the chaos within their borders. They were indifferent to the conflicts outside of their borders. At this moment, two powerful martial sages with extraordinary means appeared out of nowhere. They were able to move freely, suppress the chaos, and resolve the disputes between the various races. They had won the respect of countless powerhouses and the admiration of hundreds of millions of people. In a short 20 years, the two martial saints had pacified the various regions outside of the three divine kingdoms. Dozens of powers, races, and tribes had publicly expressed their allegiance to the two martial saints. Countless commoners had even taken the initiative to ask the two martial saints to stay and lead them to prosperity. However, the two martial saints were not attached to power and drifted away, returning to seclusion. The two martial saints were the famous yin-yang sages. The two of them were a celestial couple. The male martial saint, Yang Tian, was a peak martial saint of the human race. He was a peerless powerhouse with extraordinary talent. The female martial saint, Yin Qi, was the princess of the Icefeather clan of the demon race. She was a peerless genius martial saint. The two of them had similar backgrounds and experiences. They had both been born in ancient and noble clans, and their statuses were prestigious. However, when they were young, their clans had met with great changes and been destroyed. The two of them had shouldered the burden of a blood feud and had struggled to survive. In the end, the two of them had risen to become peerless powerhouses and had taken their revenge. Although there were close to 100 martial saints in the world, the yin-yang sages did not have much experience and were very young. However, their strength had reached the rank 8 and rank 9 martial sage realm. Among the martial saints, they were already peak existences. Yang Tian, in particular, was known as the genius closest to becoming a martial god. If a fourth martial god appeared on the continent, it would be him. However, the good times did not last long. More than 1,800 years ago, the last time the yin-yang saints appeared was in the depths of the ruins of God. At that time, both of them had reached the 9th level martial sage realm and seemed to have been exploring the ruins of deity in search of an opportunity to break through to the martial god realm. But since then, the yin-yang saints had never shown their faces again. For the next 300 years, countless warriors on the continent were discussing and curious about the whereabouts of the yin-yang saints. Most people believed that the twin sages of yin and yang must be cultivating in seclusion in a secret realm, trying their best to break through to the martial god realm. However, this was only everyone's guess, and they were unable to confirm it. That was until more than 1,500 years ago, when the Kenshin appeared out of nowhere and rose to prominence as an invincible force, entering the sights of all the martial artists in the world. Since then, Kenshin had attracted everyone's attention, drawing the fanatical worship of hundreds of millions of martial artists. All the martial practitioners in the world were discussing him passionately and worshipping him like a god. Especially when Kenshin had broken through to the martial god realm, taught the two martial gods, and left through the rift. His various feats had caused huge waves throughout the Shunwu continent, and they had been discussed by the common people for thousands of years. The legends of the yin-yang saints were gradually forgotten by the common people. If not for Ji Ku's message mentioning this matter, Ji Tianxing would never have thought of it. He held the jade slip in his hand and muttered to himself, "There are rumors that the yin-yang saints are cultivating in seclusion in a secret realm, trying their best to break through to the martial god realm." Who would have thought that after 1,800 years, the yin-yang saints would never appear again? Now, there's finally news, but they've already passed away. The legendary yin-yang saints were a match made in heaven, and the woman was the most beautiful in the world, while the man was unparalleled in elegance. They were a match made in heaven, and everyone envied them. In the martial world, where power and influence ruled, this couple was elegant and otherworldly, like a clear stream in a muddy world. They had actually died without a trace, which was quite a pity. Ji Tianxing sighed, and his heart was filled with regret. At this time, Ji Ku continued, after those powerhouses discovered the secret realm of the yin-yang saints, a great battle broke out before they could even enter. Although most of them died, there were a few who managed to escape alive. After the news spread, countless adventurers and martial artists flocked to the secret realm. Even the martial arts organizations of the various divine kingdoms sent their elites into the ruins of God. Everyone wanted to enter the yin-yang secret realm to obtain the martial arts inheritance of the yin-yang saints, as well as the wealth and treasures they had accumulated throughout their lives. At this point, Ji Ku paused for a moment before continuing. After the great demon saint heard the news, he wanted to go to the ruins of God personally to explore the yin-yang secret realm. However, he had a heavy responsibility and could not leave the North Underworld mountain without permission. Therefore, he gave this task to the newly ascended demon saint, the fifth demon saint, Ji Xioluo. Ji Xioluo is already gathering his troops, and he plans to bring 100 elites to the ruins of God. I'm thinking of a way to join this team and make a trip to the ruins of God. After talking about the yin-yang secret realm, Ji Ku suddenly thought of something and added, "Oh right, there's one more thing. The fourth demon saint, Patriarch Xue Pao, had his Dharma body destroyed. After escaping back to the North Underworld mountain, he entered the abyss to recuperate. I heard that Patriarch Xue Pao had to recuperate for 100 years before he could reconstruct his Dharma body and regain his peak strength. The ancestor Fiend Celestial felt that it was too long, so he personally used a secret technique to heal Patriarch Xue Pao. He should be able to recover in about half a year. Brother Tianxing, Patriarch Xue Pao was injured at Tianzhu Mountain. After he recovers, he will definitely go to Tianzhu Mountain again to seek revenge. You must be mentally prepared and be on guard." Ji Ku exhorted in a solemn tone, and then the transmission ended. Ji Tianxing silently kept the transmission jade slip and frowned as he fell into deep thought. I was right. Patriarch Xue Pao will need 100 years to reconstruct his Dharma body. This is something the ancestor Fiend Celestial does not want to see. He is currently lacking manpower and will definitely use other methods to heal Patriarch Xue Pao quickly. Even if he has to destroy Patriarch Xue Pao's demonic foundation and sacrifice his future, the ancestor Fiend Celestial will not mind. This result was just as Ji Tianxing had expected. He was not surprised at all. After all, Patriarch Xue Pao would need half a year to recover. Only then would he come to Tianzhu Mountain to seek revenge. Ji Tianxing did not mind. What really surprised him was the appearance of the fifth demon saint, Ji Xioluo. The ancestor Fiend Celestial is indeed powerful to have nurtured the fifth demon saint in such a short time. Since the various powers and Ji Xioluo are going to the ruins of God to obtain the inheritance and treasures of the yin-yang saints, I must go to the ruins of God. Not only do I want to join in the fun, but I also want to meet the new demon saint. Chapter 1957. Ji Tianxing had made up his mind to go to the ruins of God. However, he was not in a hurry. The mystic realm where the yin-yang saints had passed away was not a place for ordinary people to enter. Even if various forces and adventurers flocked there, he did not have to worry at all. The mystic realm and treasures could only be obtained by those who were fated. It did not mean that whoever arrived first would get it first. Ji Tianxing decided to cultivate in seclusion for a few days and break through to the fifth level of the tribulation stage as soon as possible. After all, his strength had reached the peak of the fourth level and was not far from the fifth level. After he was ready, he passed through the secret passage in the corner of the secret chamber and entered the Star Divine Furnace underground. Swoosh! He stretched his limbs and dived into the silver-white sea of fire, allowing the Star Divine Fire to burn his body. He shuttled through the sea of fire like a fish and quickly swam to the center of the sea of fire and sat cross-legged on the star torch. Then, he focused on using the star body refinement art to absorb the Star Divine Fire to refine his Dharma body. 8 days passed quickly. Ji Tianxing cultivated in the star divine furnace for 8 days without being disturbed by anyone. After 8 days of cultivation, not only had his physical body strengthened to the extreme, but he had also absorbed a large amount of star divine fire. His strength had increased by 80% and reached the limit of the 4th level of the tribulation stage. Therefore, he ended his cultivation and left the star divine furnace. After returning to the secret chamber, he naturally sensed something in his mind. In the unseen world, the heavenly Tao sent down a hazy thought. His 5th tribulation would be in 2 days. After confirming the date of the tribulation, Ji Tianxing calmly meditated and adjusted his breath. He had to adjust to the best state to welcome the arrival of the tribulation. Of course, in these 2 days, he had to continue to condense the sword intent. Condensing the sword intent now could not only greatly increase his combat strength, but more importantly, it was to prepare for the future. When he returned to the martial sage realm, he would hide the sword in the void and control thousands of swords. Without his sword intent, the power would be greatly reduced. Unknowingly, 2 days passed. On the morning of the 3rd day, Ji Tianxing ended his cultivation and walked out of the secret chamber. After 2 days of cultivation, his sword intent was more condensed and would soon be successfully condensed. Of course, this was a matter for the future. What he needed to do now was to transcend the 5th tribulation. Ji Tianxing leisurely walked out of the Heaven Pillar Palace and came to the dojo that had a radius of 100 miles. It was the time for the morning sun to rise. The warm sunlight shone on the dojo. The morning fog had just dispersed, and the air was still filled with fresh spiritual energy. More than 30 green-robed outer disciples were practicing their swordsmanship on the dojo. Everyone's movements were uniform. Sword light flashed, and sword chi burst forth, showing their valiant poise. Even though those disciples were only practicing the 4 C's return to one sword technique created by Kenshin, the Pillar of Heaven's Mountains introductory sword technique, the Pillar of Heaven's Mountains sword technique. However, everyone practiced very seriously and carefully. Their moves were perfect. It was obvious that they had put in a lot of effort for many years. Ji Tianxing was satisfied and couldn't help but reveal a gratified smile. When he walked to the center of the training hall and prepared to receive the heavenly tribulation, the disciples had just finished practicing their swordsmanship. Everyone gathered in groups of 3 to 5 to exchange their experiences in martial arts and swordsmanship. Suddenly, someone saw Ji Tianxing and immediately shouted excitedly, "Look! It's young Master Ji." This shout was like a stone thrown into a lake, causing ripples to appear on the surface of the lake. The rest of the disciples were alarmed and looked towards the center of the training hall. After seeing Ji Tianxing, everyone was excited. They cheered and discussed. "It's been 3 months and young Master Ji has appeared again. Ha ha ha. Young Master Ji is so elusive. Every time he appears, he has to transcend the tribulation. I bet that young Master Ji is going to transcend the tribulation again after cultivating in seclusion for 3 months. Everyone, look. The weather is changing. Tribulation clouds are forming. What are you waiting for? Go and inform the other disciples to come and watch young Master Ji transcend the tribulation." More than half of the green-robed disciples hurriedly left the training hall to inform the others. The remaining green-robed disciples also consciously retreated to the edge of the training hall and watched excitedly. Wind and clouds gathered high in the sky. Boundless grey clouds gathered above the Heaven Pillar Mountain. About 15 minutes later, the grey clouds gathered and turned into a 100-mile-wide black cloud vortex that enveloped the training hall. The morning sun was blocked and the peak of the Heaven Pillar Mountain became dark. A terrifying aura spread out from the tribulation cloud vortex and enveloped the Heaven Pillar Mountain. Purple, gold, and blue lightning flashed and exploded in the vortex. Hundreds of people who heard the news gathered around the training hall and looked at the training hall with anticipation. Ji Tianxing stood in the middle of the training hall calmly, exuding the aura of the heaven and earth. Soon, the first bolt of lightning struck. Kaboom! Just as Ji Tianxing expected, this was his 5th tribulation. 5 bolts of lightning struck from the tribulation cloud vortex. The 5 bolts of lightning were of different colors. They were gold, red, purple, blue, and there was also a bolt of black lightning. This type of black lightning contained the power of annihilation. It was terrifying and unpredictable. Ji Tianxing had seen it the last time when he transcended the tribulation. He was fearless as he calmly raised his palms. He put his index and middle fingers together on his left palm and used the sword Soul Dao technique to stab the sky 9 times. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. 9 huge golden swords were born. They carried the power of annihilation and blasted towards the 5 bolts of lightning. He drew a circle with his right palm and struck out a mysterious black light. It turned into a huge vortex and flew into the sky. Bang, bang, bang. Loud noises were heard as the sword light shattered the 5 bolts of lightning on the spot. Thousands of lightning fragments fell and were enveloped by the black vortex. They were immediately swallowed by Ji Tianxing. Just like that, the first heavenly lightning was easily neutralized by him. Next, the tribulation cloud vortex struck the second and third bolts of lightning one after another. Whether it was 10 bolts of lightning striking at the same time or 20 bolts of lightning striking at the same time, the result was the same. Ji Tianxing struck out a sword light with his left palm and a vortex with his right palm. He easily destroyed the bolts of lightning and devoured them. After the third bolt of lightning, the tribulation cloud vortex surged faster and started to change. By the time the fourth bolt of lightning struck, the number of lightning pillars had reached 40. Moreover, each lightning pillar had 5 colors. When the powers of the 5 attributes were mixed together, the power increased by several times. The most terrifying thing was that the 40 bolts of lightning were arranged in an orderly manner. They contained the mysteries of the heavenly Tao and the power of a formation. It was even more terrifying and unpredictable. Ji Tianxing had no choice but to be cautious and use 100% of his strength to resist. 15 minutes later, the 4th, 5th, and 6th bolts of lightning were all neutralized by him. Even when the 6th bolt of lightning struck, there were as many as 160 bolts of lightning, densely packed like a sword formation and a rain of arrows. He still destroyed all the bolts of lightning and devoured them. He was completely unscathed and looked completely relaxed. To him, no matter how strong the first 6 bolts of lightning were, they were just appetizers. The real highlight was the last 3 bolts of lightning. Chapter 1958. After the 6 bolts of lightning, the tribulation cloud vortex began to change again. The pitch-black tribulation cloud vortex was soon dyed with a layer of dark red blood. The 7th bolt of lightning finally descended. A dark red bolt of lightning struck down and turned into a large ball of bloodlight that enveloped Ji Tianxing. This was the inner demon tribulation. Ji Tianxing was enveloped by the bloodlight. His soul and consciousness were trapped in illusions as he endured the test of the inner demon. All kinds of illusions came at him. All kinds of bizarre but traceable pictures were constantly interrogating his soul. His willpower was under great stimulation and test. However, he maintained his original heart and did not waver. In the blink of an hour passed. Ji Tianxing finally turned the misfortune into a blessing and successfully resolved the inner demon tribulation. The dark red bloodlight that enveloped him also quickly dissipated. Immediately after, the 8th bolt of lightning descended. Kaboom! A 1,000-foot-long 5-colored bolt of lightning that looked like a divine dragon struck down from the tribulation cloud vortex. This was the great tribulation of wind and fire. Ji Tianxing could neither dodge nor resist. He could only endure the test. After the bolt of lightning struck him, it immediately turned into a 5-colored lightning fire that enveloped his body. The 5-elemental lightning enveloped him and ruthlessly struck his body. The blazing 9 heavens hurricane and the mysterious black flames surged into his body and burned his blood, bone marrow, and internal organs. Ji Tianxing calmly endured and used the great tribulation of wind and fire to temper his avatar. His skin and flesh continued to fester and burn into black ashes that scattered in the sky. However, he quickly grew new flesh and blood that was stronger than before. After a full 15 minutes, the great tribulation of wind and fire gradually dissipated. He had successfully passed the great tribulation of wind and fire and tempered his avatar. His strength had more than doubled. After the 8 bolts of lightning, the tribulation cloud vortex suddenly slowed down. The vortex within a radius of 50 kilometers began to rapidly shrink and condense, becoming more and more solid. Within the black clouds, there was even a 5-colored dazzling light that emitted a mysterious power. Ji Tianxing looked up at the tribulation cloud vortex and murmured expectantly, "I have already passed the tribulation of 7 emotions, reincarnation, time, and 5 elements. What tribulation will I face this time?" Roughly 100 breaths of time later, the tribulation cloud vortex had shrunk by 10 times, becoming only 10 miles in radius. Finally, the 9th bolt of lightning struck. Boom! A dazzling 5-colored lightning bolt shot down from the tribulation cloud vortex. At that moment, an earth-shattering sound of thunder shook the heavens. The entire pillar of heaven's mountains shook, and the heavens and earth were filled with an indescribable divine might. The dazzling light illuminated the entire peak of the pillar of heaven's mountains. It was so dazzling that no one could open their eyes. Ji Tianxing was suppressed by the formless power of the heavenly Tao. He was under unimaginable pressure, and his face turned pale. After the 5-colored heavenly lightning struck him, it immediately turned into a dazzling 5-colored light that enveloped him. After a long while, the world finally regained its calm. Only the dazzling 5-colored light with a radius of 10 miles was left floating quietly in the sky above the dojo. The hundreds of disciples around the dojo looked at this scene with confusion and whispered to each other. No one knew what mysteries this heavenly lightning had. At the same time, Ji Tianxing was in a vast world. The sky was blue, and there were white clouds floating in the sky. A dazzling golden sun hung in the western sky, casting down a golden light for hundreds of millions of kilometers. Ji Tianxing stood on the peak of a mountain. Below his feet was a bluestone the size of a house. He was surrounded by a dense forest with towering trees. The forest was dark, and the ground was covered with flowers and vines. There were also clusters of shrubs. There were flocks of birds with gorgeous feathers chirping on the branches in the forest. There were also many snakes, insects, and beasts that quietly moved through the forest, making rustling sounds. Looking into the distance, there was a vast grassland at the foot of the mountain, with green weeds growing. There were flocks of birds flying in the sky above the grassland, and there were also agile tigers, leopards, and jackals hunting each other in the grass. At the end of the grassland, there was a mirror-like lake that reflected the light. Further away, the horizon was blocked by a dark green mountain range. Ji Tianxing stood on the bluestone, taking in everything around him. Breathing in the fresh and pleasant air and feeling the vast spirit qi of the world, he felt refreshed. Such a picturesque and peaceful world is a good place to cultivate in seclusion. However, I'm in the midst of a heavenly tribulation, and this space is definitely a test. This thought flashed through Ji Tianxing's mind, and he remained vigilant at all times. He stepped into the sky and flew across the grassland like a stream of light, heading towards the end of the horizon. First, he had to understand this space and find out what kind of test it was before he could think of a way to resolve it. Half an hour later, he flew across the grassland and the majestic mountain range, arriving at the end of the horizon. There was endless darkness at the end, and there was nothing there. It was sealed by the invisible power of the heavenly Tao. He turned around and flew in another direction to investigate the size of this space. About 2 hours later, he figured it out. This was a space with a radius of 10,000 miles, like a small world. There were mountains and rivers, flowers and trees, birds and beasts, and all living things. It was no different from the 5 elements realm. However, this small world was wrapped in endless darkness and sealed by the power of the heavenly Tao. He was trapped in the small world and could not get out. Could it be like the 5 elements tribulation last time, where I had to borrow the power of the small world to break through the darkness seal? It shouldn't be. The final test of each heavenly tribulation is different. The test of this heavenly tribulation is definitely not the 5 elements tribulation. Ji Tianxing stood high in the sky, frowning as he fell into deep thought. In the end, he decided to give it a try. He flew to the end of the small world and controlled the power of the 5 elements to condense a mountain range that extended into the darkness. However, the dark void was like an invisible wall, and no power could enter. He tried to step into the darkness, but the moment he touched the darkness, he was sent flying back. The result was as he expected. The dark void was sealed by the heavenly Tao, and he had no chance of escaping. If he wanted to resolve the test of the heavenly tribulation, he could only start from the small world. In the following half a month, Ji Tianxing had been wandering in the small world, searching for clues to resolve the test. However, he turned the entire small world upside down several times, but he still did not find anything. He had no clue. He was trapped in this small world and could not escape at all. However, when he was wandering in the small world, he discovered a strange thing. There was no night in the small world, and it was always daytime. The wolves, tigers, leopards, birds, and beasts that he saw before were also growing at an exaggerated speed. Most importantly, the flow of time in the small world was more than 1,000 times faster than the outside world. He wandered in the small world for half a month, and it was actually equivalent to 50 years. In 50 years, the small sapling became a towering tree, the birds and beasts became demons, and the wolves, tigers, and leopards also became demonic beasts. He also became old, and his appearance was actually like a man in his 30s. Chapter 1959. Is this heavenly tribulations test related to time? This was Ji Tianxing's first thought. He knew very well that there were many kinds of power in the world. For example, the 5 elements, space, thunder, wind, rain, and so on could all be controlled by martial artists. Only the power of time was the most mysterious and difficult to master. Martial artists below the god realm could only use some formations and refining materials to change the flow of time. If one wanted to truly control time, it was only possible to reach the god realm. But on second thought, it didn't seem right. I've already passed the space-time tribulation before. There's no reason for another time test, right? With a heart full of doubts, Ji Tianxing continued to wander in the small world. Soon, another half a year had passed. With his concept of time, half a year had passed in the small world. But in fact, 600 years had passed in the small world. The former grassland had turned into a forest, and many towering trees had withered and aged. The newborn birds and beasts had turned into demons, and the aging beasts gradually died. In the small world, scenes of new life and death were played out every day. Ji Tianxing's form and face gradually changed, and he became a 40-year-old middle-aged man. He had explored the small world with a radius of 10,000 miles hundreds of times, and he couldn't be more familiar with it. But he still had no clue. He didn't know what this test was or how to resolve it. He could only cultivate in the small world and wait silently. Unknowingly, 6 years had passed. Ji Tianxing's strength had reached the limit of the 5th level of the tribulation realm, but he could no longer improve. More than 7,000 years had passed in the small world, and there had been tremendous changes. The vicissitudes of life, the scenes of new life and death, he had seen them all. And his own appearance had also undergone tremendous changes. He had become old and weak, and he had become a white-haired old man with a white beard that reached his chest. Even his strength had declined, his realm was constantly falling, and his magic power was becoming more and more exhausted. Such a scene made him anxious and worried. With complicated emotions, he sighed, no matter how high a martial artist's wisdom is, they can't withstand the passage of time and the erosion of the vicissitudes of time. Even a peerless martial god can't escape the 10,000-year limit. In the end, they will turn into ashes and return to heaven and earth. Only the heavens and earth exist forever. No matter how many tens of thousands of years pass, it will never disappear. As he thought of this, an idea suddenly flashed through his mind. All living things can't escape the 10,000-year limit. Even martial gods are no exception. Only heaven and earth can exist forever. Could it be that the test of this heavenly tribulation is related to heaven and earth? At the thought of this, Ji Tianxing was enlightened. His deep eyes flashed with a bright light. He hurriedly used the armillary heaven secret technique to merge himself with heaven and earth. Shua. In the blink of an eye, his figure disappeared, becoming one with the heaven and earth within 1,000 miles. At the same time, the peaceful small world began to change dramatically. The sun that always hung in the sky gradually disappeared into the darkness. The small world lost its light and was shrouded in boundless darkness. Immediately after, the spiritual chi of heaven and earth rapidly dissipated, and even the air disappeared. In just a few years, the small world had become a vacuum zone, no different from the dark void. The flowers and trees began to wither and wither. Large tracts of forests and grasslands turned into ashes and dust. The birds and beasts also quickly died. Even the demonic beasts with magic power gradually withered and died. 50 years later, the small world became a dark and cold world without any life. All living things had died, leaving only the cold earth. Of course, the only life that survived was Ji Tianxing. Seeing this scene, Ji Tianxing finally understood. I see. I understand now, this is the great tribulation of heaven and earth. When he was in the upper realm, he had heard of the great tribulation of heaven and earth and the legend of the 5 decays of heaven and man. Under the shroud of the heavenly axiom's will, every world was in the cycle of reincarnation, and all living things had a great limit. From new birth, to growth, to prosperity, then to decline, perish, and rebirth, the cycle repeated. In low-level small worlds, 100,000 years was a cycle. All living things from new birth, to reproduction, development, and prosperity, until the great tribulation of heaven and earth arrived and returned to death, usually only took 100,000 years. For a large world like the 5 elements world, it usually took a few 100,000 to 1,000,000 years for a cycle. In the beginning, the world was a cold and dead wasteland, icebergs, and seas. There were no living things. It was only when the 5 elements spirit chi appeared that flowers, trees, and all living things appeared in the world. Then, in the long years, all living things developed, grew, and gradually gained intelligence. When the world developed to its limit and all living things grew to their limit, the great tribulation of heaven and earth would arrive. All living things would be destroyed and returned to the world. When the next era came, the world would be reborn. Of course, no matter how many cycles the world went through, only heaven and earth would exist forever. After understanding all this, Ji Tianxing was suddenly enlightened and no longer worried. The changes in this small world are the microcosms of the various worlds. When the great tribulation of heaven and earth arrives, all living things will be destroyed, even martial gods are no exception. Only by transforming into heaven and earth can one avoid the great tribulation and survive. Ji Tianxing made up his mind and used the secret technique with all his might, trying his best to merge with the wider heaven and earth. As time passed, the world within a radius of 5,000 kilometers gradually shrank and dissipated. Soon, another 2,000 years had passed. The world within 5,000 kilometers shrank by more than half and was only left with a radius of 1,500 kilometers. Ji Tianxing endured in the 1,500 kilometers of heaven and earth with incomparable fatigue, waiting for a new life. His mind and dharmic powers were exhausted and he was on the verge of fainting. Up until now, he had already spent 10,000 years in this small world. The great tribulation had passed and a new life had arrived. A dazzling golden light appeared in the sky above Ji Tianxing. The sun reappeared and its bright sunlight illuminated the world within 3,000 kilometers. The power of the 5 elements gradually appeared and brought vitality to this world. Heaven and earth spirit chi reappeared and the cold desert turned into a mountain range with saplings and buds growing. In just a few short decades, the world within 3,000 kilometers returned to its original state and was filled with mountains, forests, grasslands, and lakes. Birds and beasts appeared one after another and grew healthily. The small world also began to expand to 4,000 kilometers, 5,000 kilometers, 6,000 kilometers. 100 years later, the small world grew to a radius of 5,000 kilometers and returned to its original state. Just like when Ji Tianxing first entered this place, it was a picturesque treasure land filled with spirit chi. At this moment, Ji Tianxing's test was finally over. He had successfully transcended the great tribulation of heaven and earth. Swoosh! With a flash of light, the world within 5,000 kilometers became distorted and blurry and soon dissipated. On the dojo at the peak of the Heavenly Pillar Mountain, the 5-colored light within a radius of 5 kilometers quickly faded and disappeared. Ji Tianxing's figure appeared and stood in the sky safe and sound.